Chapter 2744, Half-Step Master, My Sister? Kurue smiled at Hong Xinyuan's question then answered joyfully, I'm afraid she won't be able to enter today. She'll have to wait until tomorrow to do so. She can't enter? Hong Xinyuan grew even more confused at Kurue's words. Why can't she enter? She has grade 2 authority. Who dares stop her? Normally, anyone with formal identification in the upper zone could enter and leave the upper zone freely. Although some circumstances could result in residents being prohibited from entering or outright banned from the upper zone, once someone reached grade 2 authority, even the base layer's supervisors wouldn't have the courage to stop them from entering the upper zone. No, nobody stopped her. Kurue shook her head, then giggled and said, It's just that the mental path is activated today. The mental path? Realization dawned upon Hong Xinyuan. However, he quickly noticed a problem. He then turned to Feng and asked, How did you come in then? He must have cleared the mental path, right? The woman seated beside Hong Xinyuan said leisurely as she glanced at Feng. He cleared the mental path? How is this possible? Hong Xinyuan stared at Feng in disbelief. No matter how Hong Xinyuan looked at it, Feng was definitely past the age of 20. If Feng wanted to conquer the mental path, the young man's mental strength needed to be of a similar grade to his own, which was the special grade. However, in the Yuantian City Upper Zone's history, never had a youngster with such monstrous mental strength appeared before. That's right. Uncle Hong Feng indeed cleared the mental path. You should have seen it for yourself. Everyone in the entrance hall was dumbfounded, Kurue said, nodding with an excited expression on her face. When Kurue finished speaking, the seated woman stood up and approached Feng. Hello, I am Xia Qingying, the general manager of the base layer. The woman introduced herself to Feng. I didn't expect that the person old Hong mentioned would actually possess special grade mental strength. Xia Qingying's sudden actions gave Hong Xinyuan a fright. Despite being only 26 years old, Xia Qingying was the general manager of this upper zone's base layer. Her authority was among the top 3 in the base layer. Her identity and status were astonishing. Xia Qingying's taking the initiative to introduce herself to Feng was 10 times more shocking than Feng's achievement of having cleared the mental path. After a moment of surprise, Hong Xinyuan hurriedly stepped forward. Feng, General Manager Xia, is a busy person. Normally, even the base layer's supervisors have a difficult time meeting her. She deliberately made time today to personally help with registering your identity and authority, Hong Xinyuan explained. Xia Qingying wasn't an individual just anyone could meet. Now that Xia Qingying was taking the initiative to befriend Feng, Hong Xinyuan naturally had to get him to seize this opportunity. This way the young man would face fewer troubles when residing in the upper zone. Hello, General Manager Xia, Feng said, nodding. I will have to trouble you today. Feng naturally understood what Hong Xinyuan meant in his explanation. At the same time, he felt grateful to Hong Xinyuan. It's no trouble. Such matters originally fall within my purview as a general manager. Only, I am usually busy and there are very few people who come to register. Therefore, I typically have several months' worth of applicants gather on a specific date to conduct an official registration, Xia Qingying said, chuckling as she carefully inspected Feng. Your appearance, on the other hand, is truly astonishing. Not only did you clear the mental path under the age of 25, but you also spent only 13 minutes to do so. This is the first time I have seen a talent of your caliber in this upper zone. What? 13 minutes? Hong Xinyuan was shocked once more. Previously, Hong Xinyuan thought that Feng's achievement was only getting through the mental path. It didn't occur to him that Feng had spent such a short time clearing it. When other individuals with special grade mental strength traversed the mental path, their average time was around 40 minutes, about 10 minutes longer than the average clear time for individuals under 20 years old. Yet, Feng had spent only 13 minutes on the mental path. For a moment, Hong Xinyuan couldn't help wondering whether Xia Qingying was playing a joke on him. That's right. This person here has broken the Yuantian City Upper Zone's mental path clear record for those under the age of 25. Xia Qingying nodded. She then looked at Feng and smiled. If I don't hurry to register talents like yourself, I'm afraid those old fellows above will nag me to death. At Xia Qingying's words, realization also dawned upon Hong Xinyuan. With such frightening mental strength, Feng's standard was most likely close to that of mental strength masters. Mental strength masters. There was not a single mental strength master residing in the base layer of Yuantian City's upper zone. The middle layer only had several of such individuals. Moreover, Every one of these individuals possessed identities and statuses that even the Boulder Corporation feared. Even though Feng had yet to reach the standard of mental strength masters, his talent was more than enough for the various upper zones to fight over him. You overpraise me, General Manager Xia. I just got lucky. I believe it won't be long before the upper zone has many people who surpass me. Truthfully, Feng felt somewhat guilty when receiving Xia Qingying's attention. This was because he had relied on a trick to get through the mental path. His actual mental strength was most likely at the advanced grade only. He was still far from reaching special grade. By his estimates, a special grade mental strength should be equivalent to a near Tier 5 concentration standard in God's domain. However, his current concentration standard was only at the intermediate Tier 4 standard, which was still far from the Tier 5 standard. We've talked for quite some time now. We should get on with official business, Xia Qingying said, changing the topic after seeing Feng at a loss in this situation. Smiling, she continued, the formal registration for identification is simple. I only need to scan you with a device, and you'll become an official member of Yuantian City's upper zone. The troublesome part is deciding what rewards should be given to you. Aren't the rewards for clearing the mental path fixed? Feng asked curiously. Previously, he heard from Kuruei that anyone who successfully cleared the mental path would receive 10,000 trade points and 1 life potion from the Green God Company. The life potion aside, just the trade points awarded were already significant. In the upper zone, trade points were as important as credits in the outside world because all transactions within the upper zone were conducted using the Green God Company's trade points. Moreover, depending on one's authority level, the number of trade points one could exchange for would differ. People without authority could exchange for only 100 trade points per day, while Grade 3 authority could exchange for 200 points, Grade 2 for 500 points, and Grade 1 for 1,000 points. Hence, while one trade point was equivalent to 10,000 credits in the upper zone, 10,000 credits were not necessarily equivalent to one trade point. There were some people who could make a fortune just by reselling their trade points. However, those who would actually do this were generally crazy, and the various corporations operating in the upper zone were more than happy to see such fools. After all, a standard meal prepared by the Green God Company already cost 30 trade points. People without authority could have only 3 standard meals per day. That was equivalent to 300,000 credits per meal. Just hearing about this made Feng think that the upper zone was really a different world from the world he lived in. Although his physique had improved significantly and he now required higher quality food to support his body, 300,000 credits could still buy him several months' worth of food. However, in the upper zone he could only get 1 meal for such a sum. Meanwhile, this was only board. There were also many training facilities in the base layer for rapidly improving physical fitness and even facilities that helped improve mental strength. All these facilities cost trade points to use. Basic training facilities cost 20 points per hour, while advanced training facilities cost 50 points per hour. It was no exaggeration to say that only people with Grade 2 authority or higher could satisfy their daily needs in the upper zone. Of course, so long as one had sufficient authority, one could also accept work from the Green God Company to earn some points and maintain their daily lifestyle in the upper zone. Take Feng for example. With 0 wings fortune, he was basically a pauper who couldn't afford even ordinary housing. Hence, 10,000 trade points was a huge fortune to him. It's fixed, but that reward is only meant for those under the age of 20, Xia Qingying said, nodding. There is no fixed reward for people who clear the mental path above the age of 20 and under the age of 25. Not to mention you managed to break the under 25's clear record. Can I ask for life water then? Feng couldn't help asking. Life water? Xia Qingying smiled all of a sudden. Do you know that life water is incredibly precious even in the Green God Company? Even if you become a mental strength master at your age, obtaining a bottle of life water wouldn't be easy. The standard price of a bottle of life water is 1 million contribution points, in addition to 30 million trade points. It's that expensive? Feng was surprised by Xia Qingying's words. Expensive? Shaking her head, Xia Qingying said with a smile, life water is one of the Green God Company's greatest masterpieces. Although it can't bring the dead back to life so long as a person still has a breath in them, they can recover from all injuries completely over time. Life water can even extend a person's lifespan and allow them to maintain youthful vitality for another 60 years. 60 years is already close to a lifetime for ordinary people. Meanwhile, not only does life water allow you to live for an additional lifetime, but you will also retain your youthful vitality throughout this period. Do you still think it is expensive? Feng couldn't refute Xia Qingying's words. In fact, he even strongly agreed with her. For the leaders of the various international corporations, money was inconsequential. They could quickly earn it back even if they lost it. However, they had only one life to live. If these people had the opportunity to live for another lifetime, they most likely wouldn't hesitate to spend their entire accumulated fortune. Take the emperors of ancient times, for example. They could do anything for longevity. Meanwhile, since Feng was so interested in life water, Hong Xinyuan couldn't help advising him, Feng, you should stop thinking about life water. Even the people living in the middle layer can hardly afford one. You should prioritize improving your mental strength for now. So long as your mental strength improves, your entry into the middle layer will be just around the corner. That's right. Let's end the talk on life water here. Xia Qingying also felt that it was unnecessary to continue talking about life water. After all, it was still too soon for Feng to obtain one. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU afterward, Xia Qingying scanned Feng with the quantum watch on her wrist. Immediately, all available data on Feng appeared on it. Your identification registration is complete. After looking at Feng's data, Xia Qingying said with satisfaction. Next, we have to determine your reward. Not only have you cleared the mental path, but you even broke the existing clear record. As the base layer's general manager, I can give you two options. The first option is to reward you with 500,000 trade points and 50 life potions or medicines of equivalent value. The second option is to reward you with an ordinary house in the base layer. You may pick one of these two rewards. Chapter 2745, Different World, the rewards are so excellent? Feng was stunned momentarily by the rewards Xia Qingying mentioned. He couldn't believe that just by clearing the mental path above the age of 20, he would get 50 times the reward of everyone else. They're not particularly excellent. However, they're the best rewards I can give you within my authority. If you were one of the Green God Company's internal members, you would receive a much more generous reward. In fact, your authority level would even be elevated to the advanced grade directly, Xia Qingying said. She then smiled and asked, May I know if you are interested in joining our company? Thank you for your offer, General Manager Xia, but I am used to operating freely but really don't wish to be restrained. Joining the Green God Company might be the dream of many people, but he knew that the Green God Company had many restrictions. This was also the reason Mushin and Kurue did not join the company but retained their connection with the Boulder Corporation instead. What a pity, Xia Qingying sighed when she heard Feng's answer. If a talent like Feng joined the Green God Company, he would have climbed to a position not lower than hers in the upper zone. After all, mental strength masters were incredibly valuable to the upper zone. The Green God Company paid astronomical prices to cultivate mental strength masters. However, even now, the company hadn't managed to cultivate many. Feng, this is a good opportunity for you. If you get 50 bottles of phantom potions, which is of equivalent value to life potions, you might be able to elevate your mental strength to the next level, Kurue said, her eyes glowing with excitement when she heard Xia Qingying's offer. Although life potion was something that could be exchanged and each bottle cost only 5,000 points, there was a limit on the number of bottles a person could exchange. People without authority could exchange for only 1 bottle per year, while Grade 3 authority could exchange for 2 bottles per year, and Grade 2 authority for 5 bottles per year. If one wanted to purchase more, they would have to buy them at a much more exorbitant price from other people. Meanwhile, the Phantom Potion was an incredibly magical drug the Green God Company developed that could sharpen and improve one's mental strength. Anyone with ambition in the upper zone would try to exchange for it. 50 bottles of Phantom Potions. She had never even seen so many Phantom Potions in her life before. With that many Phantom Potions, she could definitely achieve a breakthrough within a year and elevate her authority to Grade 2. General Manager Xia, does the Green God Company have any medicine that can heal mental damage? Feng asked as he looked at Xia Qingying. Currently, life water was definitely out of his reach. Hence, he could only seek inferior alternatives to stabilize Gentle Snow's and Aqua Rose's mental states temporarily for now. We do, but these medicines are much more valuable than life potion, Xia Qingying answered as she looked at Feng strangely. She couldn't understand why Feng would want something like this. However, she still explained, out of all the injuries out there, mental trauma is the most difficult to treat. If you wish to purchase such medicine, you can only do so after entering the middle layer. However, you are not qualified to enter the middle layer yet. I can buy them only in the middle layer? Feng frowned. He then said, General Manager Xia, I've decided. I will take the ordinary house. When Hong Xinyuan heard Feng's decision, He couldn't help looking at the young man in surprise. Hurriedly he dissuaded Feng, "You're crazy. It's not easy to get 50 bottles of phantom potion. Even with your grade 1 authority, you'd need 5 years to redeem that many. The Green God Company has a completely different evaluation for those who reach advanced grade authority before and after the age of 25. Before the age of 25, humans would still be in their growth stage. Reaching the advanced grade authority before 25 meant they still had potential for growth. The Green God Company would prioritize nurturing such talents even if these talents were outsiders. An example of this would be how Xia Qingying was showing so much care for Feng right now. However, if Feng was already over 25 years old by the time he reached the advanced grade authority, the Green God Company's evaluation of him would plummet. Before Hong Xinyuan could continue trying to dissuade Feng, Xia Qingying suddenly extended a hand to stop the older man. She then looked at Feng with a strange gaze. "It seems you are adamant on restoring mental trauma. You actually gave up the possibility to improve yourself rapidly within a short period and settled for a house that can just barely maintain and heal a person's mental state," Xia Qingying said, seemingly having seen through Feng's intentions. She then smiled lightly and continued, "Okay, since this is your decision, I won't meddle with it. However, I should still give you a reminder. The upper zone isn't as simple as you think it is. Life here is not easy. If you wish to help someone, the fastest way to do so would be to raise your own authority. Anything else is just futile effort." "I understand. Thank you for the reminder, General Manager Xia," Feng replied gratefully. "Also, I wish to participate in the contribution competition. Can I register for it now?" An individual of Xia Qingying's status probably wouldn't pay people like himself a second glance under normal circumstances. She had gone out of her way to help him this time only because she admired the excellent potential he had shown. However, Feng understood himself very clearly. In reality, he was still far from the standard of a mental strength master. Even with the Phantom Potion's help, he could, at best, elevate his mental strength to the special grade. In his situation, such an achievement would be of no help whatsoever. Rather than doing something meaningless, he would rather stabilize Gentle Snow's and Aqua Rosa's conditions by relying on the upper zone's environment. After all, from what he heard from Kurue, people who entered the upper zone without gaining any authority would have to struggle to survive in the upper zone unless someone provided them with accommodation. However, obtaining a residence in the upper zone was easier said than done. Even an ordinary housing unit cost 1 million trade points. 1 million trade points. That was equivalent to 10 billion credits in the outside world. Moreover, even if he had that kind of money, it would still take him a very long time to exchange for 1 million trade points. Most importantly, every housing unit had a limited occupancy. An ordinary housing unit could accommodate 5 people at most, whereas the independent villas could have up to 20. For the various major corporations, let alone 20 slots, even 100 slots wouldn't be enough. After all, who didn't have close friends? Who didn't have sons and daughters? Who wouldn't wish to live in the upper zone forever? Hence, he would be dreaming if he thought he could borrow other people's houses. It might be fine if he were alone, but if he wanted to help other people, he would need an ordinary housing unit of his own. The contribution competition? It seems you're more extraordinary than I thought. In that case, I have nothing more to say, Xia Qingying said, nodding. She then transferred a message from her quantum watch to Feng's and said, "This housing unit in the 6th Southern District will be yours from now on." Feng was overjoyed when he saw the information displayed on his quantum watch. Although it was called an ordinary house, its floor area was still more than 200 square meters, definitely enough for 5 people to live comfortably. "I have registered you for the contribution competition. However, I'm afraid the likelihood of you catching up with the other participants is low, especially if you are aiming for the top 3. Every one of the top 3 participants has more than 100,000 points already. I heard they have the backing of God's domain's super guilds. It's impossible for you to catch up to them now," Xia Qingying said as she looked at Feng. "However, you can try competing for the top 20 positions. Our company plans to offer the top 20 winners the right to purchase 3 items from the middle layer. You can give it a try at that time." Feng was slightly surprised by Xia Qingying's words. Hurriedly, he thanked her. "Thank you, General Manager Xia." Afterward, Xia Qingying spoke a few words with Hong Xinyuan before departing the building. From her haste, it was evident she was truly busy. Meanwhile, Kurue was greatly angered and frustrated by Feng's decision. She never thought that Feng would give up on such an excellent opportunity to improve himself. Even Hong Xinyuan shook his head over Feng's decision. After instructing Kurue to guide Feng, he also gave Feng a few reminders. However, unlike Kuruei and Hong Xinyuan, Feng felt very happy with his current situation. This was because he had reaped a massive harvest from his visit to the upper zone this time. He had also finally understood the importance of 7 luminaries crystals and found a way to heal Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose. He had even found a way to help outsiders into the upper zone. Once his authority reached the advanced grade and he entered the upper zone's middle layer, he could spend 100,000 contribution points to exchange for 1 upper zone reserve slot. While he could exchange for only 3 slots per year with this method, this was still good news for him. After all, his goal wasn't simply to live in the upper zone by himself. As the sun set, Kuruei brought Feng to his residence in the 6th Southern District and left without saying a word, evidently unhappy with Feng's decision. This left Feng standing alone in front of the residential building's entrance. Isn't this house a little too amazing? Feng was stunned when he entered Unit 02 on the 35th floor. Not only was the housing unit fully equipped with smart facilities, but it even boasted a comprehensive array of exercise equipment. After entering the house, Feng also felt much more comfortable than before, as if his whole body was soaked in a nutrient solution, and he could continuously improve his physical fitness even without doing any training. His brain also felt clearer than ever, like when he was in a mana-rich environment in God's domain. Moreover, every bedroom in the house was equipped with a state-of-the-art fearless virtual gaming cabin, something even more amazing than the virtual gaming cabin Silverwing had purchased. According to Feng's memories, the fearless virtual gaming cabin was a model that would appear in the outside world only 3 years later. The fearless cabin did not just allow players to fully immerse themselves in God's domain. It also improved the player's sensitivity. In particular, the cabin improved mana sensitivity by at least 20% and allowed players to exhibit 100% of their mental strength in God's domain. Back when the fearless cabins were first released to the public, the various corporations had fought over them frantically. Each unit had sold for at least 100 million credits. Moreover, the fearless cabins were always in short supply. Even 10 years after God's domain's launch, first-rate guilds could only afford to supply their executives with fearless cabins. The situation of second-rate guilds had been even worse. Even a guild leader like Feng did not get to use a fearless cabin. I never dreamed I would have the opportunity to experience the fearless cabin in this life. Feng was deeply moved by this situation. At this moment he finally understood why people who entered the upper zone would be unwilling to leave it. The various environmental benefits aside, just the technology one could enjoy here was leaps and bounds ahead of the outside world's technology. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EUA 20% increase to mana sensitivity. Even ordinary Tier 3 experts would experience a huge boost in combat power if they received such an improvement. What more peak experts and apex experts? The increase in mana sensitivity would also help players tackle their future promotions. After all, mana was the foundation of everything in God's domain. The more one understood about the operation and control of mana, the stronger one would become. It seems I should have Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose come over as soon as possible. These fearless cabins alone could increase their chances of reaching Tier 4 by at least 10%. As Feng looked at the pitch-black gaming cabin that was the size of a double bed, many thoughts and plans ran through his mind. After he gained a rough understanding of the house's functionality, he hopped into his fearless cabin without hesitation, intending to experience the effects of this legendary gaming cabin properly. Not to mention, it wouldn't be easy for him to return to Silverwing's headquarters at this time. Once the cabin linked with God's domain's main god system, Feng muttered in his heart, "Log in." Chapter 2746 Fearless Cabins affects Twin Towers Kingdom, Fiery Ridge. As a level 90 map in the Twin Towers Kingdom, the Fiery Ridge was popular with level 90+ players, who would come here to grind for levels. However, these players didn't do so just because it was suitable for players of their level. Instead, it was also because the Earthfire Pterodactyl, a level 96 world boss, would appear in the Fiery Ridge from time to time. Compared to other world bosses, the Earthfire Pterodactyl was much easier to raid. So long as players met the high requirement for fire resistance, even a 100-man team made up of Tier 3 players could take it down. Hence, while grinding for levels in the Fiery Ridge, the various large guilds' newcomers would also check whether the Earthfire Pterodactyl had respawned. If the world boss had respawned, they would notify their guilds immediately, and their respective guilds would send a team to raid it. Not only could the players contributing to the world boss's discovery earn a bunch of GCPs, but they might even get a piece of level 100 fine gold equipment if they were lucky. More and more NPCs have been competing with us for monsters recently. Fortunately, this place is quite far from NPC cities, and there aren't any villages or towns nearby. Otherwise, we would lose even this leveling spot, a level 97 Tier 2 Shield Warrior said. As he looked at the corpses of a dozen level 95 chieftains and one level 96 lord before him, he couldn't help sighing ruefully. Ever since the major system update, the good days of grinding as many monsters as they wished were no more. Now, NPCs were frequently seen hunting monsters in groups in almost all leveling maps. Moreover, these NPCs would generally be 10 levels higher than the map they were grinding in. They also boasted enviable weapons and equipment, with even the lowest quality piece being at the dark gold rank. Many of these NPCs even wielded epic weapons. As a result, almost no player would dare mess around with these NPCs. Indeed, we are lucky. According to some of the Tier 3 big shots in the guild, level 100 neutral maps are infested with level 130 plus, Tier 3 NPCs. There are more NPCs than monsters in some places. This forced the others in the guild to travel to farther locations. Now their travel time is twice as long as before, a level 91 Tier 2 oracle commented. However, this is also our chance. Now that the leveling speed of players under level 100 is much faster than of players above level 100, if we catch up to the average level of the mainstream players and get promoted to Tier 3, we'll be set for life, a level 95 Tier 2 ranger said excitedly. Although God's Domain had been popular since its early stages, it wasn't as popular as it was now. At present, almost nobody in the real world did not know of God's Domain's existence. Meanwhile, the competition in God's Domain was intensifying by the day. Now, reaching level 100 and entering level 100 neutral maps was akin to going from a normal mode dungeon to a hell mode dungeon. The difficulty of leveling up increased drastically. Although this was bad news for mainstream players, it was undoubtedly good news for newcomers like themselves. As they had joined God's Domain much later than mainstream players, they had missed out on plenty of opportunities during the game's early stages. Now was the perfect opportunity for them to catch up. At present, the various guilds were frantically recruiting Tier 3 experts, with some guilds even promising a considerable monthly income. Some students that played God's Domain were currently earning more money than society's white-collar elites. This situation drew more and more working-class members and elderly people into joining God's Domain to earn extra income to subsidize their living expenditures. As the members of this six-man party were conversing among themselves, a sudden shockwave swept over them. Boom! The intense shockwave made the surrounding trees sway and shake. Even the earth shuddered slightly. What's going on? The level 97 Guardian Knight looked toward the shockwave source in astonishment. However, before anyone could react to the situation, a high-pitched noise forced the six players to shield their ears. This is definitely the Earthfire Pterodactyl's screech, the young ranger said, his eyes glowing. So long as they reported this piece of news back to the guild, they would make a great contribution. The Earthfire Dragon should be in that location, the Guardian Knight said, pointing toward a valley in the west. Quick! This thing won't wait for anyone. After briefly exchanging looks, the six players dashed toward the valley. Although they didn't know who angered the Earthfire Pterodactyl, all they needed to do now was locate the world boss and wait for the guild to send a Tier 3 team to raid it. As for the possibility of other guilds discovering the Earthfire Pterodactyl first, that did not matter. After all, the level 96 world boss wasn't such a pushover that Tier 2 players could take it down, especially after monsters in God's Domain gained a semblance of sentience. Now, smarter monsters would even flee for their lives when the situation looked bad for them. The process of chasing these monsters down would be incredibly troublesome and time-consuming. This would give their guild's Tier 3 team more than enough time to arrive. The Earthfire Pterodactyl's screech attracted player teams to its location in the dozens. All of these teams reported the world boss's appearance to their respective guilds, and they were all adamant in securing the Earthfire Pterodactyl's kill. After all, as a world boss, the Earthfire Pterodactyl's loot was extraordinarily good. It would drop not only inferior legendary materials but even epic weapons and equipment that could be used up to level 120. If one were lucky, one could even get fragmented legendary items. Less than a minute after these dozens of teams began running, they arrived before the valley where the pterodactyl was. However, when these teams saw the Earthfire Pterodactyl, they gasped involuntarily. The world boss before them right now was completely different from the Earthfire Pterodactyls they had seen before. Why is this Earthfire Pterodactyl so big? Why does it have 9 HP bars? A 50-meter-tall pterodactyl was hovering inside the valley. The pterodactyl's body burned with ethereal flames, and its flapping wings generated powerful gales that shredded the surrounding terrain. Just its roar was enough to send players stumbling backward. It had transformed the environment into a scorching field that could burn players with fire resistance below 400 points to a crisp instantly. Earthfire Pterodactyl, World Boss. Mythic, Realm Lord, Level 99 HP 3,300,000,000. The players that arrived before the valley fell into fear and despair when they saw the Earthfire Pterodactyl's massive frame. After all, the World Boss had flattened the terrain with just a flap of its wings. At this moment they would most likely turn into ashes just by approaching the Earthfire Pterodactyl, let alone fighting it. In fact, they even doubted that the Tier 3 players of their respective guilds could go up against this behemoth before them. Wait. It's injured. A level 97 Tier 2 Ranger exclaimed after carefully inspecting the Earthfire Pterodactyl. At this Tier 2 Ranger's shout, everyone noticed the many bone-deep wounds on the World Boss's body. They realized that the World Boss had less than half of its HP remaining. While everyone was shocked by the Earthfire Pterodactyl's injuries, a figure suddenly descended toward the World Boss from the sky. Not only did this figure send a sword light cutting at the Earthfire Pterodactyl's wing, but the sword light even cleaved the ground, opening a 150-yard-long fissure. Immediately afterward, a mind-blowing number appeared above the World Boss's head. -5,157,624. Over 5 million damage in one attack. Is he an NPC? No. Although we can't see his information, that person has a player icon above his head. He should be a player. How is this possible? How can a player be so strong? Is he trying to solo the Earthfire Pterodactyl? The players present couldn't help gaping when they saw the results of the slash, their minds refusing to believe their eyes. However, before anyone present could snap out of their daze, the figure that attacked the Earthfire Pterodactyl executed another slash with his sword. Immediately, a phantom greatsword manifested in the air and sliced down on the World Boss's wing. Slash. The next moment, the Earthfire Pterodactyl let loose a heaven-shaking shriek as one of its 30-meter-long wings fell to the ground. Golden blood then poured out of the World Boss's wound, splashing all over the ground and creating a sea of flames. -31,544,734. The next moment, the Earthfire Pterodactyl's HP fell by a visible chunk. Is he even human? He dealt over 30 million damage in one attack. He can't be human. Monster. That person must be a humanoid monster. Everyone present fell into a daze once more when they saw the damage from the unknown person's second attack. Some players even pinched their own faces, thinking that everything in front of them was just an illusion. However, the unknown assailant in the air was not at all surprised at the power of his attack. Sure enough, it's easier to manipulate mana. The burden of using light shadow is even much less. As expected of the fearless cabin. It's no wonder all those superpowers had so many more Tier 4 experts than first and second-rate guilds. Feng sighed ruefully as he looked at the dense mana condensed around the abyssal blade. Although the fearless cabin did not improve his basic attributes, it still increased his overall combat power by at least 20%. The refinement in his control over combat techniques and mana techniques was especially notable. With his ability to use 100% of his mental strength, the power of these techniques had risen to a whole new level. More and more people are gathering. It's about time I finished it and left this place. After glancing at the Earthfire Pterodactyl, which could no longer fly, Feng immediately flew toward the World Boss. Upon seeing him, the Earthfire Pterodactyl let loose an angry roar and used its strongest move, the Tier 4 skill Earthfire Rupture. The next moment, flaming rocks up to 40 meters in diameter went smashing toward Feng one after another. Even space itself shattered from the power within the flaming rocks. A meaningless resistance. Feng pointed the abyssal blade at the oncoming flaming rocks. Tier 4 legacy skill, Blade Domain. Immediately, magic swords appeared around Feng one after another. The swords then turned into streaks of light as they shot at the oncoming rocks. Boom, boom, boom. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. A shattered space formed above the battlefield. Before the spectating players could return to their senses, the magic swords had already shattered all of the flaming rocks the Earthfire Pterodactyl summoned. Afterward, more magic swords formed around Feng and subsequently shot at the World Boss itself. -21,346,544 to 43,671,216. Damages exceeding 20 million appeared above the Earthfire Pterodactyl's head one after another. No matter how much the world boss struggled, even to the point of turning the surroundings into a sea of flames and void, its HP still decreased rapidly. Less than a minute later, the Earthfire pterodactyl let out one last agonized screech before collapsing into the sea of flames. From start to end, the world boss had not inflicted a single point of damage on Feng at all. Chapter 2747, Crazed. Eastern Continent. The Earthfire pterodactyl collapsed to the ground and shook the entire valley. However, despite witnessing the world boss's death, none of the spectating players charged forward to try to steal some of its loot. Silence enveloped the valley, a silence so overwhelming that it felt as if time had stopped inside the valley. When the various spectating players looked at the cloaked man wielding the runic black sword, fear and awe filled their eyes. It was as if they had just seen a god. Is he really a player? Such thoughts surfaced in the spectating players' minds as they looked at Feng hovering in midair. Feng had killed a level 99 mythic-ranked world boss just like that. Rather than a world boss, it looked more like some elite monster he found by the roadside, one that was utterly incapable of putting up any resistance. Who is he? There's no way a player can be this strong. That's a level 99 world boss we're talking about. Even a 100-man Tier 3 team wouldn't necessarily be able to take it down. He must be an NPC in disguise. When looking at Feng's hovering figure, some players even hugged their heads and began laughing maniacally. They simply couldn't bring themselves to believe that such a massive gap between players could exist. However, Feng paid the shocked players and the maddened players no heed whatsoever. Instead, he arrived beside the Earthfire pterodactyl's corpse and began collecting its loot. God's domain was not reality. In the game world, just the gradual accumulation of basic attributes was sufficient to turn a player into a monster in the eyes of other players, what more the qualitative improvements brought about by tier upgrades. Moreover, there was a two-tier gap between Feng and the spectating players. In the eyes of Tier 2 players, Tier 4 players would be no different from gods. In fact, a Tier 4 player could kill scads of Tier 2 players with just a flick of their hand. The world boss Feng fought hadn't even reached level 100. In God's domain, monsters that hadn't reached level 100 couldn't be considered strong at all. Otherwise, the various major powers wouldn't be contesting so frantically for world bosses below level 100. It was precisely because these powers were incapable of defeating level 100 plus world bosses that they had to settle for pre-level 100 world bosses. A good piece of epic equipment dropped. Feng was slightly surprised as he looked at the sacred mage robe in his hands. Whistling light robe, cloth armor, epic rank, level 40, level 110 equipment requirement. Intelligence 1500, Vitality 1300, Defense plus 340, level 40, Strength plus 20, Agility plus 24, Intelligence plus 63, Vitality plus 31, Endurance plus 25, Ignore levels plus 4, Defensive skills plus 2 levels, Cast range increased by 20%, Intelligence and Vitality increased by 10%. Additional passive skill 1, Spiritual Light. When the user's concentration falls below 50%, mana consumption is reduced by 30%, and casting speed increases by 30%. Additional passive skill 2, Mana Armor. Automatically absorbs mana in a 100-yard radius to protect the user. Improves mana perception by 20%, increases magic resistance by 20%, and improves spell effects by 20%. 2-piece set effect. The upper level limit of all Whistling Light set pieces is increased to level 150. 4-piece set effect. All attributes are increased by 20%, and the effect of all spells is increased by 20%. 6-piece set effect. Gain the protection of light, improving physique by 30% and mana affinity by 20%. Gain the Mana Heart skill. When activated, forcibly elevates the strength of the user's mana by 1 tier for 1 minute. The skill has a 1-hour cooldown. The Whistling Light set had 7 pieces in total. It could be considered top tier even among epic set equipment. So long as a magical class player had 2 set pieces, they could use the set until they reached level 150. If Tier 4 Great Wizard managed to gather 6 pieces of the set, they would become a devastating existence. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the Whistling Light set was one of the best set equipment for magical class players under Tier 5. However, only world bosses under level 150 dropped the Whistling Light set. The drop rate was also random. Hence, collecting a full set would be incredibly difficult. I can get Fire and the others to raid world bosses under level 120 more frequently. If we can gather a full set, be it Violet or Aqua who uses the set, neither will have to replace their equipment before reaching Tier 5. When Feng looked at the Whistling Light robe, he felt the need to collect the full Whistling Light set. If Violet Cloud or Aqua Rose equipped the full set before reaching Tier 5, they would become nigh invincible against Tier 4 opponents. Feng stored the Whistling Light robe and collected the remaining items the Earthfire Pterodactyl dropped. Besides the Whistling Light robe, the level 99 world boss had dropped a dozen pieces of level 100 dark gold and fine gold weapons and equipment, a large amount of materials, magic crystals, potion recipes, etc. After putting all these items in his bag space, he promptly flew away from the valley. When the various major powers members saw Feng leaving, they sighed in relief. With that long sword and that frightening destructive power, he should be Black Flame, right? I tagged along with my guild executives to watch the reserve seat competition. That guy indeed looks a lot like Black Flame. They must be the same person. Black Flame is also the only known Tier 4 player in the game right now, and only Tier 4 classes could possibly display such scary strength. So, he's the Sword King? Isn't he a little too amazing? After Feng's figure was out of sight, some of the spectating players guessed Feng's identity. And in no time at all, everyone present began talking about him, their discussions becoming especially heated when the topic touched on Tier 4 classes. When the players present recalled the scene of Feng chopping off one of the Earthfire Pterodactyl's wings, they couldn't help yearning to reach Tier 4. Previously, no one had a clear concept of Tier 4 classes. Even the players who had spectated the reserve seat competition at the War God's Temple did not find Tier 4 classes to be particularly amazing. At most, Tier 4 existences were invincible among Tier 3 players. But now, everyone was truly shocked by the strength of Tier 4 classes. A Tier 4 player had actually single-handedly defeated a mythic-ranked world boss. How could anyone not yearn for such strength? Very quickly, news of Feng slaying the Earthfire Pterodactyl spread across God's domain. After the various major powers executives watched Feng's battle video, they gained a newfound appreciation of Tier 4 classes. Simultaneously, their eyes burned with a passionate flame as the ambition they had lost due to the NPC's upsurgence returned. Tier 4. Mobilize all available manpower in the guild to find out how Zero Wing managed to complete the Tier 4 promotion quest. The era of Tier 3 classes is over. From now on we have only one goal, and that is Tier 4. So long as we can secure ourselves a Tier 4 player, we'll be unstoppable. For a time, the various powers searched frantically for information relating to Tier 4 legacies, going as far as trying to plant spies in Zero Wing. Some superpowers even directly contacted Zero Wing's executives and offered to pay astronomical prices for all information regarding Tier 4 classes. Simultaneously, a wave of discussions spread through the various kingdoms and empires forums. Just the video of Feng's fight against the Earthfire Pterodactyl alone had garnered over 1 billion views already. Everyone on the forums discussed what exactly Tier 4 classes were, what the upper limit of these classes' combat power was, and whether a Tier 4 player could solo a mythic monster of the same level. The topic of Tier 4 swept across the entire eastern continent, setting off a craze. Meanwhile, after Feng left the Fiery Ridge, message prompts and call requests immediately inundated his communication interface. At a glance, he noticed that the message prompts had already reached the upper limit of 9,999. He had also received several hundred call requests. Moreover, this was with his interface set to automatically reject communication from non-friends. Without this block in place, his communication interface would probably have blown up. Guild leader, you really caused a huge mess this time. When Yulan finally managed to get through to Feng, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The entire world is now looking for Tier 4 legacy lands. Zero Wing has also become the target of all the powers. Everyone is trying to get information about Tier 4 legacy lands from us. Currently, all of Zero Wing's executives were being harassed by the various powers. Yulan herself had been contacted by over 20 superpowers, with every one of them offering to purchase information on the Tier 4 promotion quest at astronomical prices. If Zero Wing did not respond to these requests, it would be akin to offending all of these superpowers. At that time, Zero Wing would really be in danger of extermination. An accident. It really was an accident, Feng said apologetically. I didn't expect something like this to happen either. He had only thought to try out the Fearless Cabin's effects. He had not anticipated such a development. Not to mention, from a certain perspective, the Fearless Cabin's effects were truly astonishing. What should we do now? Yulan asked, frowning. If we refuse all of them, We'll make an enemy out of every superpower on the eastern continent. After giving the matter some thought, Feng said, how about this? Announce that Zero Wing is willing to sell information on the Tier 4 promotion quest. However, the price of the information is 5,000 units of 7 luminaries crystals. 5,000 units? Guild leader, isn't this a little? Yulan gaped at Feng's price. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The price tag of 5,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal already went beyond gouging. Feng was basically asking the various superpowers to hand over their lives. A superpower could be considered wealthy if they even had 3,000 or 4,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal on hand. With many superpowers having participated in the recent reserve seat competition, they definitely would have much fewer 7 luminaries crystals available than before. Hence, the price of 5,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal would be beyond most superpowers right now. Just notify them, Feng instructed, having no intention whatsoever of compromising. I've already set my price. As for their willingness to purchase the information, that is none of our business. All right, but I won't care for what happens next, Yulan said as she nodded her head helplessly. Afterward, she publicized Feng's price to the various powers. Chapter 2748. Better to die on your feet than live on your knees. Neutral map, Crimson Rain Forest. In a forest where crimson rain poured, a team of 1,000 Tier 3 players was frantically fighting a horde of over 10,000 level 120+ bloodthirsty beasts. Even the weakest of these bloodthirsty beasts were level 121 chieftains, while the strongest were level 126 grand lords. On the player's side, shield-wielding guardian knights and shield warriors stood in the forefront. On the bloodthirsty beasts' side, iron-armored beasts, whose strength lay in their defense, spearheaded a charge against the guardian knights and shield warriors. After the first group of iron-armored beasts completed their ramming attack, another group would immediately follow in an endless loop. Meanwhile, the Herculean beasts standing at the rear of the bloodthirsty beasts formation would uproot the crimson trees around them and hurl the trees at the players, the trees dyeing the sky an extra tint of red. The bloodthirsty beasts' terrifying formation was one that even Tier 3 players accustomed to group battles would be afraid of. Ordinary Tier 3 players wouldn't risk a frontal confrontation with these monsters. However, despite facing such a fierce and ruthless assault, the 1,000-man team fighting the bloodthirsty beasts remained unfazed. We've attracted enough. Magical team attack. A valiant, long-haired woman standing near the front line of the team commanded as more and more bloodthirsty beasts gathered around the team. Immediately, the several hundred magical class players standing at the center of the team's formation began chanting complex incantations simultaneously. Every verse the players chanted drew more of the ambient mana, making it stronger and more violent. 4 seconds later, the ground began to shake violently. Huge cracks then appeared 500 yards away from these magical class players, right under the bloodthirsty beasts, causing the monster's formation to collapse instantly. Swordsmen and berserkers open a path. Rangers and assassins prioritize killing the bloodthirsty chieftains commanding the monsters. Upon seeing the bloodthirsty beast formations collapse, the long-haired woman had the team disperse into multiple units and prioritize killing the bloodthirsty beasts that led the horde. As for the long-haired woman, like a demon in the night, she instantly appeared behind a 7-meter-tall level 126 Grand Lord. The next moment, she brandished the daggers she wielded, the weapons distorting space and repeatedly stabbing the Grand Lord's back over a dozen times. Every stab inflicted over -500,000 damage, the series of attacks instantly plundering nearly 8 million HP from the bloodthirsty chieftain. After the successful attack, darkness enveloped the long-haired woman's body. This cloak of darkness then expanded to envelop the Grand Lord entirely before rapidly recondensing in front of it. Passage, passage, passage. Blood suddenly spurted from the bloodthirsty chieftain's 4 limbs. Not only did its mobility get reduced significantly, but its HP was even falling at a rate of 700,000 per second. The 3 level 124 Great Lord ranked bloodthirsty guards nearby faced similar fates. Blood gushed out of their limbs, and their mobility plummeted as if their bodies had become frozen. After around 15 more minutes of battle, this bloodthirsty chieftain and 3 bloodthirsty guards collapsed to the ground, the life in their eyes vanishing. Meanwhile, the other bloodthirsty beasts on the battlefield were also mostly dead. The items they dropped were strewn all over the place. However, none of the combatants chose to pick up these items. Instead, they continued advancing deeper into the Crimson Rain Forest in an orderly manner, leaving behind a few parties of assassins to clean up the battlefield. At this time, A level 119 female guardian knight approached the long-haired woman in command of the team. She then said quietly, "Vice Guild Leader, news just came from Zero Wing. They say they're willing to sell information on the Tier 4 promotion quest." "Oh? He's actually willing to sell the information?" Cold Shadow was surprised to hear White Feather's words. In her opinion, the information on the Tier 4 promotion quest was Feng's greatest trump card in God's domain. It was something he definitely would not sell to other people. "He is willing to sell, but the price he demands is incredibly high," White Feather said with an ugly expression, emphasizing the words incredibly high. "Incredibly high?" Chuckling, Cold Shadow asked, "How much does he want?" 5,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal, White Feather replied in a low tone. Feng obviously has no intention of selling that information. He's clearly just messing with us." 5,000 units? He really knows how to set a price, Cold Shadow said, smiling. "I'm guessing that those superpowers are fuming at Zero Wing at this point. They'll most likely disregard all costs and take action against Zero Wing. That's for sure. There's no way those superpowers can afford to pay 5,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal. If they want that information, their only option is to work together and declare war on Zero Wing," White Feather said, nodding. Feng was basically treating the various superpowers as fools by demanding such an exorbitant price. The various superpowers would be insane to go along with him. "Fine. Go and notify Zero Wing that I'm buying it," Cold Shadow said, smiling. "You're buying it?" White Feather's eyes widened immediately as she stared at Cold Shadow in disbelief. "Vice Guild Leader, that's 5,000 units of 7 luminaries crystals we're talking about." While mythology could indeed disperse 5,000 units of 7 luminaries crystals, it would still suffer from the loss. Not to mention, the guild's higher-ups kept reiterating that the 7 luminaries crystal was the guild's most important resource and must not be used randomly. "That's right. I'm buying it." Cold Shadow nodded. She then asked White Feather, "Do you think Zero Wing's people are fools?" After giving the matter some thought, White Feather answered, "They shouldn't be, but they're still too arrogant." Yes. Zero Wing was arrogant to the bones. The guild was not taking the various superpowers seriously at all. That's enough then. Since they're not fools, they should be aware of the consequences of pulling such a stunt. In a slightly resentful tone, Cold Shadow added, "Although I detest Zero Wing, the fact that Zero Wing has survived until now shows that the guild isn't as simple as we think it is. Even Sir Odin gave up on killing Feng. You can tell how extraordinary he is. But that's 5,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal." White Feather couldn't help repeating herself. "The guild definitely won't agree to this transaction." "I already said that I would buy it, not the guild," Cold Shadow said, shaking her head. "So, we don't need to worry about what the guild will say about this. Vice Guild Leader, if you buy it, you'll be giving away all the 7 luminaries crystals you've saved to Zero Wing." White Feather was even more shocked at Cold Shadow's words. Hurriedly, she warned, "In this case, I'm afraid you will have to postpone becoming the first Vice Guild Leader indefinitely." 7 luminaries crystals had always been very important to mythology. Hence, Cold Shadow had constantly been stockpiling the crystals since early on so that she could contribute them to the guild during a critical moment and have the guild recognize her value. However, if Cold Shadow used up her entire stockpile, gaining recognition would be difficult. While 7 luminaries crystals are indeed important, getting promoted to Tier 4 is much more important right now. Gazing at the endless crimson forest ahead of her, Cold Shadow said seriously, "The places Tier 3 players can visit are too limited. Only after reaching Tier 4 can players venture into more valuable locations. Hence, our first priority now is to reach Tier 4. Then we can easily earn back those crystals." In reality, Cold Shadow felt extremely upset by Feng's actions. She wanted nothing more than to give him a few hundred deaths right now. However, in the current God's domain, only Feng knew how to get promoted to Tier 4 quickly and the exact details of the Tier 4 promotion quest. Getting her hands on this information would be equivalent to securing herself an absolute advantage. After all, she had reached level 120 already with Zero Wing's information. She could undoubtedly reach Tier 4 ahead of everyone else in the guild. She could be the first to venture into places that players currently consider taboo and continuously strengthen herself. At that time, even becoming the strongest expert of mythology's younger generation wouldn't be impossible. "I understand. I'll make the necessary preparations now." Seeing the determination in Cold Shadow's eyes, White Feather understood that there was nothing she could say to dissuade Cold Shadow from her decision. At present, the various superpowers should already have players at level 120. If Cold Shadow could reach tier 4 ahead of everyone else, her authority in the guild would definitely increase. Of course, Cold Shadow was also making a gamble. She was betting that Zero Wing would not lose to the various superpowers and that Zero Wing could survive the upcoming battle. In that case, she would obtain an absolute advantage. However, White Feather wasn't aware of how crazy Cold Shadow actually was. In Cold Shadow's opinion, it did not matter whether Zero Wing could survive or not. She would be satisfied so long as she could get her hands on this opportunity. Orc Empire, Silverwing City, damn it. Zero Wing is clearly toying with us. That's right. We are kindly offering to purchase his information on the Tier 4 promotion quest, yet he's repaying us like this. Let's just join hands. So long as we join forces to hinder Zero Wing's operations, Zero Wing will have to yield to us. Yes. With our combined strength, there's no chance whatsoever that Zero Wing will survive. Many of the superpowers operating in Silverwing City secretly came to an agreement to suppress Zero Wing. They began targeting Zero Wing's members to force Zero Wing into obediently surrendering the information on the Tier 4 promotion quest. Meanwhile, inside Zero Wing's residence, Feng received a call from Yuan Tiexin. Guild leader Black Flame, you've gone too far this time. Even if you want to sell the Tier 4 promotion quest information, you could have just asked for 1,000 units. I believe most superpowers would be willing to pay such a price. You will also get to make a big profit. Why must you have Zero Wing make an enemy out of the superpowers? Yuan Tiexin said in exasperation. For the various superpowers, paying 5,000 units of 7 luminaries crystals was akin to forking over their lives. However, a price of only 1,000 units would still be palatable to many superpowers. At that time, not only would Zero Wing earn a bunch of 7 luminaries crystals, but the various superpowers also wouldn't seek trouble with Zero Wing. It would be the best of both worlds. Yet, Feng had chosen to take the worst possible action. Make enemies? Chuckling, Feng said, I never intended to become enemies with them. Also, you're wrong about one thing, Elder Yuan. They are the ones forcing Zero Wing to sell information on the Tier 4 promotion quest. We aren't selling it because we want to. I've given them my price. If they can't afford it, how is it my fault? What you say is indeed correct. Yuan Tiexin naturally understood Feng's take on this situation. However, Zero Wing's circumstances were inferior to the various superpowers. Meanwhile, having wealth without the strength necessary to protect it became a sin. But those superpowers won't share your way of thinking. They will definitely cooperate in secret to target Zero Wing's members. At that time, Zero Wing's members will shed a river of blood. The various superpowers might be incapable of breaking through the defenses of Zero Wing's guild cities right now, but having people target Zero Wing's members out in the fields would be a piece of cake. There was no way Zero Wing's members could avoid going out to grind for levels. There was also no way Zero Wing could have peak experts escort and protect every guild member. Once the various superpowers took action, Zero Wing would eventually lose members in large numbers. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. As for Zero Wing retaliating against the various superpowers? The superpowers scheme wasn't going to be something as straightforward as a frontal confrontation. Instead, they would be taking covert action against Zero Wing. In that case, how could Zero Wing possibly determine which superpower was actually taking action against it? Moreover, even if Zero Wing managed to identify the superpowers responsible for the attacks, with there being so many superpowers, could Feng possibly win against them all? He would exhaust himself to death just by running about the numerous maps. However, in response to Yuan Tiexin's words, Feng said calmly, we'll shed rivers of blood then. Chapter 2749, Tier 4 Promotion Quest Secret. This is madness. He has truly gone mad. After hanging up the call, Yuan Tiexin fell speechless. He never thought that Feng would be so stubborn. Feng clearly could have settled things easily so long as he made some concessions, yet he had adamantly refused to do so. Uncle Yuan, many of those superpowers have already begun joining forces. When they find out that Zero Wing is unwilling to concede at all, they will definitely take action, Purple Jade said as she read the report her subordinate just sent her. Zero Wing's present situation could be said to be very bad. According to the report, over 15 superpowers had already agreed to work together to deal with Zero Wing. Forget it. He can do whatever he wants. The clash between the various superpowers and Zero Wing will most likely drag on for some time. After all, Zero Wing's 3 cities are too difficult to take down. We'll see who can last until the end, Yuan Tiexin said, shaking his head. A glimmer of light then flashed in his eyes as he continued, "Also, we still have more important matters to deal with. If we succeed in this upcoming operation, the secret pavilion can thoroughly surpass the various superpowers. At that time, even the 5 great super guilds will have to fear us." "I'll make the necessary preparations," Purple Jade said, her eyes similarly filled with joy and excitement. Tier 4 had never been the end of God's domain. Instead, it was only the beginning. The secret pavilion had been waiting for this moment for far too long. Now it could finally fulfill its long-cherished wish. Dark Knight Empire, Starlink's residence. Haha. Good. That's what Zero Wing should do. That's right. Go and thoroughly offend those superpowers. Lu Xinghua laughed happily when he received news of Zero Wing's actions. Previously, he had had a huge headache over how to deal with Zero Wing. However, Zero Wing had actually taken the initiative to offend even more superpowers. With this, he would have a much easier time destroying Zero Wing. As Lu Xinghua was celebrating in joy, a robust man covered in a black cloak and runic bandages suddenly entered his office. "Sorry for the long wait, young Master Lu," the robust, middle-aged man said as he arrived before Lu Xinghua. He then continued in a low tone, "We have resolved most of the troubles there already. We are only waiting for your side now." "Good. You came at the perfect time. This time even the heavens want Zero Wing dead." Lu Xinghua grew even more excited when he looked at the mysterious middle-aged man. "Leave it to me. I'll definitely persuade those old fellows to give you their full help." "Thank you, young Master Lu," the robust man said. "So long as this operation succeeds, the lord of our household will also assist young Master Lu in quelling all your enemies." "I believe you." "After all, no one has a better understanding of God's domain than you guys right now," Lu Xinghua said, smiling. Be it this robust man or the person backing him, Lu Xinghua placed immense trust in them. In the eyes of these people, the various superpowers were negligible. Given enough time, these people could even take on the 5 great super guilds simultaneously. This was because the 5 great super guilds did not understand God's domain at all. What they knew now was only the tip of the iceberg. Orc Empire, Zero Wing's residence. Guild leader. Aside from one person, no superpower has stepped forward to purchase the information on the Tier 4 promotion quest, Yulan said. As she watched Feng casually sort the information on the Tier 4 promotion quest, her head throbbed. Judging by the other superpowers' actions, they don't plan to buy it. Since these superpowers had no intention of purchasing the information, their next action was obvious. They would fight for it. They would fight a war of attrition that would last days and weeks. Meanwhile, Zero Wing's opponent this time would no longer be just 1 or 2 superpowers. Instead, almost all of the Eastern Continent's superpowers would become Zero Wing's enemies. There's actually a fool trying to buy it? Feng was surprised when he heard Yolan's words. Truthfully, he had never once thought that any of the superpowers would purchase his information at the price he quoted. He was sorting through the information on the Tier 4 promotion quest only because his own guild needed it. After all, quite a few Zero Wing members already possessed the strength and level required to challenge their Tier 4 promotion quest. All they lacked was the knowledge of how to search for their respective Tier 4 legacy lands and the process of obtaining their Tier 4 legacies. Yulan was momentarily rendered speechless by Feng's response. After hesitating for a moment, she said, "You know this person, guild leader?" "I know them. Is it the secret pavilion's Yuan Tiexing?" After giving the matter some thought, Feng felt that among his acquaintances, only the secret pavilion's Yuan Tiexing could afford to purchase his information. As for Frost Heaven, the guild had just participated in the reserve seat competition. It definitely did not possess 5,000 units of 7 luminaries crystals at this point. "No, it's mythology's cold shadow," Yulan said, shaking her head. She then asked hesitantly, "Guild leader, are you really planning to sell it to her?" Due to the reserve seat competition, Zero Wing was now on Mythology's radar. If they sold information on the Tier 4 promotion quest to Mythology now, it would be incredibly disadvantageous for Zero Wing. "Of course. Why wouldn't I sell it?" Feng answered without hesitation. "We already announced our intention to do business. Since we said we would sell the information, we naturally can't go back on our word. Otherwise, the various superpowers will have even more reason to target us." He was in urgent need of 7 luminaries crystals right now. Although he had some methods for obtaining a large amount of the crystal, these methods required a lot of time to execute. He wasn't certain he could collect enough 7 luminaries crystals to surpass the top 3 rankers of the upper zone's contribution competition within the next 2 months. At best, he could secure one of the top 20 positions. Gaining 5,000 units of 7 Luminaries crystal now would save him a lot of trouble. However, White Feather has stated that we cannot mention this transaction to anybody else, Yulan said. They want this to be a secret between only our two sides. They also want to sign a contract to this effect. That won't be a problem. Even if they didn't suggest it, we would have asked them to sign a confidentiality agreement that restricts them from sharing the information with outsiders, Feng said. Information on the Tier 4 promotion quest was like a hot potato right now. Anyone holding it would be struck with misfortune. Even a super guild like Mythology wouldn't be safe. Hence, it was very normal for Mythology not to want outsiders to find out about this transaction. Make a copy of everything here and give it to them, Feng instructed as he handed the compiled information on the Tier 4 promotion quest to Yulan. Everything? Yulan was surprised to hear Feng's words. The players of God's Domain were still ignorant of the Tier 4 promotion quest. In fact, even Zero Wing's members knew nothing about it. If they sold all this information to Mythology, that would be akin to throwing away all their advantages. Everything. Feng nodded. Since the other party is willing to pay an astronomical price for this information, I naturally won't be stingy. Not to mention, the secret to the Tier 4 promotion quest isn't a secret at all. Once the various superpowers learn about it, we can let them know how ridiculous their fantasies about the secret are. Information on the Tier 4 promotion quest was indeed incredibly precious. At the very least, that was the case now. However, once one of the various superpowers experts successfully reached Tier 4, the information he was selling would be worthless. Yes. It didn't matter how much information he provided about the Tier 4 promotion quest. The real value of his information was simply in helping to produce the first Tier 4 player as quickly as possible. Moreover, the so-called information on the Tier 4 promotion quest couldn't actually be considered a secret. This was because locating the Tier 4 Legacy Land and resolving the problems one would encounter in the Legacy Land were both problems that players needed to resolve on their own. The only information he could provide was the method to search for Tier 4 Legacy Lands. Whether one could locate their Legacy Land with this information would still depend on their luck. After all, Tier 4 Legacy Lands did not have a fixed position. They would appear at random in God's Domain. The Tier 4 Legacy Lands were all located in spaces outside of the main continents. What players needed to do to visit these Legacy Lands was find the randomly occurring spatial nodes that could teleport them to these Legacy Lands. In addition to the information on how to search for Tier 4 Legacy Lands, the only other valuable information he provided was the process of learning one's legacy during the promotion quest. With this information, one wouldn't go into one's promotion quest blind. Even so, the amount of help this information could provide was limited because the process of learning one's legacy depended entirely on the individual. Outsiders couldn't help in this matter. Meanwhile, the method he provided to search for Tier 4 Legacy Lands was to venture into incredibly dangerous neutral maps of at least level 130. The more dangerous a neutral map was, the more likely one could find a Tier 4 Legacy Land. Only by searching in these maps would one have a greater chance of locating a Tier 4 Legacy Land. Aside from this method, there was no other way. If he excluded these bits of information, then the information on the Tier 4 promotion quest he sold would be nothing but a scam. After reading the information, Yulan was stunned. This is the Tier 4 promotion quest secret? Yulan suddenly felt the urge to laugh. The various superpowers were currently desperately trying to obtain information on the Tier 4 promotion quest. However, if they were to learn the exact details of the information, they would most likely lose their minds. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. After all, in the information Feng compiled, there was nothing whatsoever that could increase one's success rate with the Tier 4 promotion quest. The funny thing was, the various superpowers thought that they could have an easier time producing Tier 4 players so long as they had this information. In fact, they were so staunch in their belief that they were waging war against Zero Wing. In reality, by targeting Zero Wing, all the superpowers were doing was wasting precious time when they could be improving themselves. That's right. This is the information on the Tier 4 promotion quest, Feng said, chuckling. I can even announce to those superpowers right now that they have already been eliminated from the struggle for hegemony in God's domain. As Feng and Yulan were conversing, Liang Jing suddenly entered the room. Guild Leader, Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor are ready. They can take action as soon as you give the command, Liang Jing said excitedly. Good. Have them start moving. Feng said, nodding. It's about time we let these so-called superpowers know how laughable their actions are. Chapter 2750, Daunting Silverwing City, Business Plaza. Due to the news of the various superpowers targeting Zero Wing, the number of players occupying the city's business plaza declined. Many players were afraid of becoming collateral damage. The independent players that were initially planning on joining Zero Wing also began hesitating. And here I thought I could join Zero Wing and spread my wings after coming to Silverwing City. From the situation now, it seems I've made the wrong call. I heard that many Zero Wing members withdrew from the guild. The ones that chose to stay don't even dare set foot outside Zero Wing's guild cities. If I were to say which guild is the strongest right now, it would have to be Saint's Hand. Why don't we join Saint's Hand? If we do, we won't have to worry about those faux saint monsters. The players inside one of the city's bars inevitably discussed whether they should head to other places to develop themselves. At this point, they no longer held any hope for Zero Wing. Meanwhile, in a corner of the bar, several cloaked men listened quietly to these conversations. The younger men among them revealed sneers on their faces when they heard about Zero Wing's present situation. And here I thought the guild she joined was some powerful existence, a level 122 Tier 3 assassin youth, who radiated an aura that made even Tier 3 experts quail, said with displeasure. It seems we were being overly concerned. To think we even went out of our way to come to this backwater. Zero Wing isn't even comparable to one of the main continent's super guilds. I really don't know how it got so lucky to actually get her to join. Now she's not even willing to join us. Old Six, don't say that. Although this place isn't much, I heard that those super guilds and super first-rate guilds have quite a few capable experts. We can use this opportunity to investigate these people and understand the standards of the experts here, a cool-headed, middle-aged man sitting at the head of the group said, chuckling. As for Zero Wing, we can just report the truth to the higher-ups once we return. At that time she will definitely panic. I guess so. Smiling, the assassin youth said, if she's willing to join us, I wouldn't mind helping Zero Wing out a little. Just when the various superpowers and independent players thought that Silverwing City would become a ghost city, large groups of players suddenly appeared on the city streets one after another. These players filled the main streets and alleyways of the city, easily numbering in the hundreds of thousands. Moreover, every one of these players was formidable. What's going on? Why are Crimson Emperors and Unyielding Souls members coming here? Are those two guilds planning to work together with Zero Wing to oppose the various superpowers? The players and powers residing in Silverwing City were momentarily dumbfounded, unable to understand what had gotten into the two super first-rate guilds for them to garrison so many of their members in Silverwing City. Moreover, this number was still increasing as time passed. In just half an hour, the two guilds had gathered over 3 million members in the city, livening up the previously desolate city significantly. Heart, has your guild gone mad? You're actually betting all your chips on Zero Wing? Is Crimson Emperor trying to make an enemy out of us? In this situation, the various superpowers had to contact Unyielding Heart and Illusory Words, who were in charge of the operation this time. Although they knew that Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor could be considered Zero Wing's allies, Zero Wing was currently going up against almost all of the Eastern Continent's superpowers. Standing with Zero Wing now was no different from suicide. Yet, to the various superpowers' astonishment, both Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor declared their intention to side with Zero Wing. Moreover, they even announced that they wouldn't sit still and do nothing should those superpowers take action against Silverwing City. However, Zero Wing's move was even more unexpected than Unyielding Souls and Crimson Emperor's. Zero Wing actually ordered all members above level 100 to gather in Silverwing City. More than 2 million Zero Wing members appeared in Silverwing City. At present, not only was Silverwing City far livelier than before, but the number of Tier 3 experts gathered in the city had also exceeded 10,000. This was more than what any other guild city on the main continent had. With more than 10,000 Tier 3 experts garrisoning Silverwing City, let alone the various superpowers, even the 5 great super guilds would have to be wary of the city. It was no exaggeration to say that with this kind of power, Silverwing City could trample the various powers operating in the Orc Empire. If the superpowers wished to create any waves in Silverwing City, they would have to disregard cost and dispatch a large number of Tier 3 experts into the city's surroundings. Anything less would be futile. Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor must have gone crazy. They're actually willing to go to such an extent just to help Zero Wing? When Cold Shadow received news of Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor's actions, she too was surprised. She had anticipated that Zero Wing had a trump card prepared. Otherwise it wouldn't have dared to provoke the various superpowers. However, Never had she expected Zero Wing's trump card to be something like this. At this moment, let alone Cold Shadow, someone who was hostile to Zero Wing, even Frostheaven's Seven Wonders was dumbfounded. He never imagined that Zero Wing could make two super first-rate guilds bet all their chips on it. With the combined force of the three guilds, even the superpowers wouldn't dare mess around. After all, those superpowers had dared to target Zero Wing before only because the guild lacked background, resources, and funding. With their advantage in numbers and funding, they could easily suppress Zero Wing and make the guild submit. However, now that Zero Wing had two superpowers backing it, numbers and funding were no longer its weaknesses. If the superpowers wished to persecute Zero Wing, they would have to pay at least 10 times the price they had to pay before. The various superpowers weren't the only ones confused by this situation. Even Zero Wing's internal members were at a loss. Damn. Our guild was actually so awesome. But why did the guild gather all of us in Silverwing City? Are we going to occupy the orc capital city? The assembled Zero Wing members speculated exuberantly. After all, the strength currently gathered in Silverwing City was no laughing matter. A force of 10,000 plus Tier 3 experts was more than enough to flatten the orc capital city's inner area. They might even be able to put up a fight in the core area. Guild leader, all our level 100 plus members have arrived. The two guilds are also ready to set off for Sky Spring City at any time, Liang Jing reported excitedly. She had maintained her calm while everyone else in the guild was panicking over Zero Wing's predicament. This was because she had found out about the secret Covenant Tower's matter ahead of time and Zero Wing's settlement into Sky Spring City. So long as Zero Wing sealed off Sky Spring City, outsiders would have difficulty setting foot out of the city. Meanwhile, Zero Wing's members could travel freely to the secret Covenant Tower to grind for levels. They wouldn't need to worry about heading elsewhere to level up. At that time, it would become almost impossible for the superpowers to harm Zero Wing's guild members. Not to mention, when the various superpowers members grinded for levels out in the fields, the interference of those troublesome NPCs would greatly reduce their leveling speed. This, in turn, would further widen the gap in leveling speeds between the superpowers members and Zero Wing's members. Alright. Open the teleportation hall now, Feng said, nodding. Although things had developed somewhat differently from his original plan, it wouldn't affect the overall situation. Afterward, all Zero Wing had to do was watch as the various superpowers struggled to cope with the increasing number of NPCs and NPC forces. Understood. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. With great excitement, Liang Jing instructed her subordinates to remove the walls and various camouflage buildings around the teleportation hall. The next moment, several 7- and 8-story tall buildings along the city's main street disappeared. Not only did the disappearance of these buildings create a spacious plaza, but there was even a massive 5-story tall building in the center of this plaza. When the players walking on Silverwing City's main street saw this building, they were immediately dumbfounded. The building sitting in the plaza was something very familiar to them. A teleportation hall? Chapter 2751. Number 1 City. In the future, the teleportation hall was a 5-story building with the footprint of 3 sports stadiums. The massive edifice looked as if it were the heart of this area. Previously, the teleportation hall's teleportation array had been suppressed by a magic barrier. However, now that the restriction was lifted, the teleportation array instantly stirred the mana inside Silverwing City, exciting the mana to flow toward the building. This sudden change stunned the players on the main street. Why does Silverwing City have a teleportation hall? Crap. I never thought Zero Wing would actually play such a card. Amazing. Simply amazing. So this is Zero Wing's true trump card? This won't do. I need to rent some shops in Silverwing City now. I must rent them no matter the cost. The many players on the streets who were originally planning to leave Silverwing City for greener pastures were now in a hurry. Some of the players who were quick to respond hastened to Silverwing City's City Lord's mansion immediately. Hurry up. Beanweed/B, notify the commander right away. We can't let the commander rent a house in another guild city. We got tricked by Zero Wing. Meanwhile, the various adventurer team's members frantically contacted their respective commanders lest they ruin their future by being even a tad slower. As for the various large guilds members, their initial gleeful expressions were now replaced with gapes of disbelief. A teleportation hall. This was a building all players in God's domain were familiar with. Everyone knew just how valuable a guild city with a teleportation hall would be. Compared to high-ranking constructions or Tier 4 NPC guards, a teleportation hall was many times more valuable. After all, so long as a guild city possessed a teleportation hall, it would be connected with the countless NPC cities of God's domain. The addition of a teleportation hall to a guild city would be akin to a human living in the Stone Age instantly transforming into a human living in the modern era. The teleportation hall would elevate the standard of a guild city by several levels. When the various superpowers received news of this addition, they were momentarily dumbfounded. None of them ever expected Zero Wing to have such a card. Meanwhile, the Zero Wing members inside Silverwing City reacted with surprise and joy. The guild leader is awesome. Those superpowers must be stupefied after this move. With the teleportation hall, Silverwing City will definitely become the heart of the neighboring kingdoms and even the Black Dragon Empire. Now, even if the superpowers are powerful, they won't be able to stop players from streaming into Silverwing City. Eventually, Silverwing City will become the #1 city in this region. Initially, Zero Wing's members all thought they were in for a bloody battle against the various superpowers. They never thought Feng would bring them such a surprise. Silverwing City was on a distant neutral map. With the addition of the teleportation hall to the city, adventurer teams and independent players could now save up on plenty of travel time by teleporting directly to the Orc Empire. Even though the teleportation fees would be exorbitant, many expert players would rather pay the higher fee than waste their precious time. The players of the neighboring kingdoms and empires were highly likely to visit Silverwing City. At that time, Silverwing City's player population might exceed 10 million, or even 20 million. The various superpowers' attempt to suppress Zero Wing economically had become an utter joke. The only problem remaining would be the superpowers covertly targeting Zero Wing's members. However, that problem could be easily resolved. Zero Wing's members could simply stop wearing their guild emblems and travel to other neutral maps to grind. Guild leader, just a moment ago, over 2,000 players visited the City Lord's mansion to lease shops from us. At this rate, it won't take more than half a day before we rent out all our shops, Liang Jing said excitedly as she read the statistics report she just received. Many NPC merchants had withdrawn from Silverwing City after Zero Wing implemented the ban on NPCs. As a result, many shops were vacant. However, with the current frenzy, Zero Wing didn't have to worry about finding tenants for these shops anymore. In fact, the number of players seeking to lease shops from the city outnumbered the NPC merchants that had left, by a factor of 10 or more. Now, Silverwing City's income surpassed even the previous total income of Zero Wing's 3 guild cities. MHM. Feng nodded, not at all surprised by this situation. However, we need to tweak the rates of our shops. Instead of just coins, anyone who wishes to lease shops in the city will also need to pay magic crystals. 1,000 magic crystals per week for shops in the city center and 300 magic crystals per week for shops in the outer area. Also, have the guild's members start making their way to Sky Spring City. In his previous life, any guild that gained the War God's Temple's recognition had practically been immune to economic suppression. The only way to hinder an official guild's development would be to destroy the said guild's guild city that housed the teleportation hall. Hence, the various superpowers had gone crazy fighting for the reserve seats. In fact, many powers would fight desperately just to secure a foreign aid position. Zero Wings becoming an official guild shortly after the first major update could be considered an incredibly fortunate matter. After all, the moment Zero Wing became an official guild, it was no longer competing on the same stage as the various superpowers. While it was indeed true that Zero Wing's current foundation was no match for that of the various superpowers, Zero Wing's potential was way above that of the superpowers. Now, all Zero Wing needed to do was completely seal the secret Covenant Tower and use it to rapidly develop the guild's strength before the NPC forces began their invasion. If everything went well, Zero Wing would just have to sit back, watch as the various powers got eliminated, and harvest the territories of these eliminated powers afterward. Now, Zero Wing was in a race against time. As for struggling against the superpowers, that was simply a waste of precious time. After all, in the past, less than 20% of the superpowers had survived the NPC forces' invasion. Since the first major update had taken place much sooner this time, the outcome would most likely be even worse. Meanwhile, after hearing Feng's orders, Liang Jing said excitedly, "I'll have them start heading over now." Afterward, the members of Zero Wing, Unyielding Soul, and Crimson Emperor in Silverwing City teleported to Sky Spring City one after another. The mass migration instantly flooded the desolate streets of Sky Spring City with players. This scene also surprised the original inhabitants of Sky Spring City. Subsequently, Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor made an announcement to every player in Sky Spring City, stating that their two guilds would be imposing a lockdown on Sky Spring City and that any unaffiliated players caught trying to leave the city would be killed without question. For a time, Sky Spring City's players fell into turmoil. Although Sky Spring City's various powers couldn't understand why Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor were doing such a thing, locking down an NPC city was child's play for the two super first-rate guilds. Hence, after receiving the announcement, Sky Spring City's various powers promptly fled the city, migrating their base of operations to other NPC cities. This, in turn, made Sky Spring City the exclusive haven of Zero Wing, Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor. At this time, a gigantic black eagle circled above the city. Sitting on the Thunder Eagle's back, Unyielding Heart pointed at the dozen or so flying mounts patrolling nearby and said proudly, "Brother Black Flame, Sky Spring City is now sealed off completely. Our two guilds have organized a flying patrol squad to secure the skies. Now, not even a bird can fly out of the city. It is indeed amazing. Players can't fly out even if they want to." Feng felt a trace of admiration as he looked at Unyielding Souls and Crimson Emperor's flying mounts. He had to admit that the super first-rate guilds were indeed powerful. In an era where flying mounts were incredibly rare, Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor had actually managed to secure so many. Moreover, by the looks of it, these flying mounts were of considerably high quality. Even the weakest among them was at the advanced common rank, with 2 or 3 of them even reaching the basic extraordinary rank. If a player did not possess an advanced extraordinary rank flying mount, they wouldn't stand a chance against the coalition of these flying mounts. However, Illusory Words shook her head at Unyielding Heart's words. Unlike Unyielding Heart, she didn't have a very optimistic view of the situation. "I'm afraid the various superpowers will start paying even closer attention to us now. If we march boldly into the secret Covenant Tower, I believe it won't be long before news of it gets out. At that time they will definitely do everything they can to investigate the matter. If that happens, the time we can keep the secret hidden will be very short. And once the various superpowers find out about the Tier 3 legacies, all of them on the Eastern continent will disregard all costs to contest over the tower. With the amount of time we have, I'm afraid we won't be able to secure many advantages from the tower." Under normal circumstances, their series of actions would have already caught plenty of attention. Now, they had even become the focus of the superpowers. Meanwhile, no secret could be kept forever, especially with massive organizations like their guilds. No matter how hard they tried to keep the secret Covenant Tower's secret hidden, the secret would eventually get out. The only way to prevent the secret from leaking would be to avoid informing the members of their guild and prevent their guild members from entering the secret Covenant Tower at all. However, they couldn't afford to take such an action. Indeed. Feng nodded. He very much agreed with Illusory Words' worries. Compared to Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart, Feng knew much more clearly just how much of an impact the secret Covenant Tower would have on the continent of God's domain. Once the tower's secret got out, the resulting struggle wouldn't be a simple competition between superpowers. Instead, it would be a fight to the death. Quite a few superpowers had even perished during the struggle back then. However, we have already acted. We can't possibly avoid entering the tower now, right? Unyielding Heart also understood that the secret would get out very quickly once they began sending their members into the tower. In fact, the secret would still leak even if they allowed only a small number of the guild's confidants into the tower's 30th floor and below. No. Feng shook his head. Smiling, he said, "We aren't exactly without options to take full control of the secret Covenant Tower. What other options do we have?" Unyielding Heart asked as he looked at Feng curiously. In his opinion, once the secret got out, their 3 guilds wouldn't be able to retain their monopoly of the secret Covenant Tower. The only thing they could do now was grind for as many Tier 3 legacies as possible before the inevitable occurred. Illusory Words also turned to look at Feng, a trace of confusion in her eyes. "You'll understand once you take a look at this," Feng said as he sent a document to the 2 people. He then added, "You must keep this matter a secret. You absolutely cannot let other people know about it. Otherwise, you will no longer have any connection with the secret Covenant Tower in the future. In contrast, if we succeed in this matter, your 2 guilds can each occupy 25% of the secret Covenant Tower's shares." "What is it? Is this thing you speak of really so amazing?" Unyielding Heart felt that Feng was indulging in hyperbole. The latter spoke as if the secret Covenant Tower was already in the bag. "You're not talking about the Tier 4 promotion quest information, right? Illusory Words joked. Shaking his head, Feng said, "You'll understand once you see it. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World." Immediately, Unyielding Heart and Illusory Words stopped speaking and opened the file Feng sent them. However, as soon as they read the information, their jaws dropped, their eyes widened in disbelief, and their hearts pounded with shock. Looking at Feng, Unyielding Heart asked in a quivering voice, Is this real?" The thing that Feng had just shown them completely exceeded Unyielding Heart's imagination. In fact, compared to it, the information on the Tier 4 promotion quest was worth less than dust. After all, the thing that Feng showed them could completely rewrite the status quo in God's domain. A small mobile fortress. Chapter 2752, Feng's Madness. "So, this is your true trump card?" When Illusory Words looked at the information displayed before her, she couldn't help finding Feng beyond her ken. First, it was the teleportation hall. Then, it was the secret covenant tower. Now, there was even a small mobile fortress. Not only did Feng reveal one secret after another, but every secret was also more amazing than the other. At this point, she even wondered whether Feng still had more astonishing secrets and trump cards hidden. She got the impression he was simply waiting for his enemies to come at him so that he could use them as Zero-Wing stepping stones. Simultaneously, she felt fortunate that Crimson Emperor did not oppose Zero-Wing. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. "Sort of," Feng said, chuckling. "May I know if you two are interested now?" In reality, even Feng coveted the small mobile fortress. However, although he had the design for it now, he barely had any of the necessary materials to construct it. Incidentally, he could pull 2 wealthy guilds into the endeavor. Taking a deep breath, Illusory Words turned to look at Feng and demanded, "Out with it. How do you want to do this?" Unyielding Heart also nodded in agreement with Illusory Words' question. He wanted to hear Feng's plans. "You've seen the small mobile fortress's basic information already." Smiling faintly, Feng said, "The wealth needed to construct it is astonishing. I can confidently say that even if we empty out your 2 guilds, we still won't have enough resources to build it." Neither Illusory Words nor Unyielding Heart refuted Feng's words. Although Feng did not show them the requirements for constructing the small mobile fortress, even a fool could tell that the cost of such a terrifying sky fortress would be astronomical. It definitely wasn't something current superpowers could afford. "I don't need you to pay for the fortress's construction cost. However, I will need your 2 guilds to pay 2 million magic crystals and 5 million gold coins each for the secret covenant tower's shares. What do you think?" Elaborating on his point, Feng said, "Once we fully occupy the secret covenant tower, we can collect entrance fees from other players. For example, we can charge 2 magic crystals or 1 gold coin. Your 2 guilds will each get 25% of the profits. Of course, before this, I still need your 2 guilds to lend me your help. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to accomplish this task." At Feng's words, Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart began pondering in silence. What Feng said was simply too astonishing. If they followed his plan, they would basically be declaring war on the Eastern continent's other superpowers. Moreover, it would be irreconcilable. Of course, if Feng's plan succeeded, Crimson Emperor and Unyielding Soul would stand at the top of the Eastern continent. To put it simply, this was a gamble. Feng was not at all surprised to see the two's reactions. In reality, he had planned to carry out such a plan since the very beginning. However, instead of revealing his full plan right off the bat, he had chosen to reveal it sequentially to the 2 guilds. Otherwise, they would most likely have rejected it then and there. Zero-Wing wouldn't be able to become a true titan in God's domain in that case. Only by securing the secret covenant tower could Zero-Wing continually produce Tier 3 players in large numbers. After all, a complete Tier 3 legacy could be used only 9 times at most. In other words, a Tier 3 legacy could, at best, produce 9 Tier 3 players. After a Tier 3 legacy's uses were exhausted, it would disappear automatically, and one would have to find another complete Tier 3 legacy. Hence, it was necessary to keep sending players to explore the secret covenant tower. However, if Zero-Wing held the tower for only a short period, the small advantage it would gain wouldn't be enough for the guild to undergo a qualitative transformation. Only by having complete control over the tower would Zero-Wing build a foundation solid enough to dominate God's domain. Now that Crimson Emperor and Unyielding Soul had seen the preliminary parts of his plan coming to fruition, the 2 guilds would also have more confidence in Zero-Wing. Meanwhile, Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart simultaneously contacted their respective superiors and secretly discussed the partnership Feng proposed. At this time, Zero Wing had given them two options. Moreover, they had to choose between these options right now. The first option was to give up on further cooperation and focus only on obtaining some benefits from the Secret Covenant Tower. Afterward, the tower would no longer have any connection with their two guilds, becoming the competition ground of the other superpowers instead. The second option was to further their cooperation with Zero Wing, taking full control of the Secret Covenant Tower and making an enemy of every other superpower on the Eastern continent. If their plan succeeded, their guilds would gain an endless stream of resources and Tier 3 players. If they failed, it wouldn't be surprising if their guilds disbanded. This was a gamble that put everything on the line. After discussing for more than 10 minutes, Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart simultaneously disconnected their calls and looked at Feng. Guild leader Black Flame, Crimson Emperor has decided to take your gamble this time. However, we have a condition for doing so, Illusory Words said slowly. If you cannot agree to this condition, we cannot further our partnership. Brother Black Flame, it is the same for my side as well, Unyielding Heart said with a bitter smile. You are playing with too big a fire this time. Our hesitation is natural. Go ahead. Feng wasn't at all surprised by this response. After all, the bet he proposed basically involved their guild's life or death. However, not everyone would have the opportunity to make such a bet either. The two guilds should know this as well, which was why they did not refuse his offer outright. Instead, they had chosen to accept his offer while increasing their chances of survival as much as possible by adding conditions. In fact, it would be strange if they didn't do so. I'm guessing the requirement of our two guilds should be the same. With a helpless smile, Illusory Words said, if Zero Wing's plan this time fails, Crimson Emperor wants half of Silverwing City's profits. Unyielding Heart nodded in agreement. The price Feng was asking their two guilds to pay was no laughing matter. If the plan really failed, their guilds would be doomed for sure. However, if they had Silverwing City's income, they could more or less survive the ordeal. That won't be a problem, Feng answered without the slightest bit of hesitation. Since he had invited the two guilds into an alliance, he naturally had to provide them with a safe path of retreat. Otherwise, who would be willing to take such a risk? After all, even if Crimson Emperor and Unyielding Soul secured only a small advantage through the Secret Covenant Tower, they could still become titans in God's domain, unlike Zero Wing. And even if the two guilds managed to gain full control over the tower, their situation would improve only slightly. They would be a step ahead of the various superpowers but still be no match for the 5 great super guilds. Bean Feng's decisiveness stunned Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart. In their opinion, Silverwing City was Zero Wing's last path of retreat. It was also one of Zero Wing's main sources of income right now and would most likely remain so in the future. One could say that so long as Silverwing City remained standing, Zero Wing would continue to survive in God's domain. However, Feng had agreed to give its income away without hesitation. What the two of them did not know was that Feng had never once deemed Silverwing City or Stone Forest City that important. The small mobile fortress was the way to go. Even if his plan failed this time and he managed to gather only a small portion of the small mobile fortress's construction materials, he would have profited massively. In his previous life, guilds had been willing to exchange 3 main guild cities for one small mobile fortress, let alone a measly basic city. Even then, no guild had accepted the trade. Following this, Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart signed a guild contract with Feng on behalf of their respective guilds. As stipulated in the contract, Crimson Emperor and Unyielding Soul would do everything they could to support Zero Wing during this time. Both guilds would also pay 2 million magic crystals and 5 million gold coins to Zero Wing. In exchange, Zero Wing would have to give up all of Silverwing City's income to the two guilds should the plan fail. When the guild contract took effect, both Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart breathed out a deep sigh of relief. This was undoubtedly the scariest and craziest wager they had participated in their entire lives. Brother Black Flame, what do you need us to do next? Unyielding Heart asked Feng. With the contract signed, their two guilds would move according to Feng's arrangement. Moreover, Unyielding Heart was also curious about what Feng needed their two guilds' strength for. Although he didn't know what it cost to construct a small mobile fortress, the price definitely wasn't something even 5 superpowers working together could afford. Otherwise, mobile fortresses wouldn't be so rare in the various kingdoms and empires. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. There's nothing much you can do now. Your two guilds just need to focus on locking down the secret Covenant Tower. At the same time, send some trustworthy members to explore the 30th floor and beyond to obtain as many Tier 3 legacies as possible. After giving the matter further thought, Feng said, in addition, I'll need your two guilds to organize a 100-man team of peak experts, which will follow me to a place. A 100-man team of peak experts? Feng's words shocked Unyielding Heart. Even working together, Crimson Emperor and Unyielding Soul wouldn't be able to form such a team. At best, they would be able to bring out 70 or 80 peak experts. Can you tell us where we're going? Illusory Words frowned at Feng's words. Peak experts were the pillars of their guilds. Fielding so many peak experts for one operation would place a heavy burden on their guilds. Chuckling, Feng answered honestly, the Ruined Mountain Range. Chapter 2753, Godslayer's Treasure, the Ruined Mountain Range? Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart were stunned by Feng's answer, their complexions turning indescribably grim. The two of them were not unfamiliar with the name Ruined Mountain Range. On the contrary, this was a name that resounded among the various superpowers. The superpowers usually sent scouts to check out level 100+ neutral maps, which had many danger zones. Some superpowers would even investigate level 130 to level 150 neutral maps. Of the explorations conducted by the superpowers, none of the exploration teams they sent into the Ruined Mountain Range had returned alive. Yes. Despite the Ruined Mountain Range being only a level 120+ neutral map, none of the expert players that entered it had returned alive. In fact, they didn't even know how they died. After suffering such bizarre losses, the superpowers stopped attempting to explore the Ruined Mountain Range. After all, the players capable of entering level 120+ neutral maps were incredibly strong experts, with even the weakest among them being at the Flowing Water Realm. Even the superpowers couldn't afford to have too many of such experts dying. Due to this reason, the Ruined Mountain Range had become a forbidden land for the various superpowers. Even though the superpowers already had level 118+ expert players under their command now, none of them dared make another attempt. After a while, Unyielding Heart asked nervously, must we go in there? Peak experts were the main pillars supporting their guilds. Even the death of one of these experts would distress them. It would be an absolute nightmare if several dozen of them died. We must. Entering the Ruined Mountain Range is the prerequisite for our success, Feng said, nodding. If possible, he wouldn't want to enter the Ruined Mountain Range at this time either. However, the Ruined Mountain Range was his only option to secure a large amount of resources quickly. This was because the Ruined Mountain Range was a true forbidden land with the lowest level requirement. Players had a chance of surviving in the neutral map so long as they reached level 120. Moreover, the Ruined Mountain Range was also one of the most highly contested forbidden lands in his previous life. Although the Ruined Mountain Range was labeled a forbidden land, it wasn't a forbidden land for all life. Instead, it was only a forbidden land for humans. Humans would face great danger when entering the Ruined Mountain Range. However, non-humans wouldn't. Most importantly, the clue he had to the Godslayer led him to the Ruined Mountain Range. After analyzing the map clue and with his understanding of the Ruined Mountain Range, he felt it was highly likely that one of the Godslayer's treasures was hidden inside the Forbidden Land. The Earthfall Secret Land. This was something he had only heard of during his previous life. Although he didn't know who activated the Earthfall Secret Land, what he did know was that the 5 great super guilds had dispatched over 40 Tier 5 experts to contest for it. The struggle between these experts had very nearly flattened the Ruined Mountain Range's outer area. As to what the Earthfall Secret Land contained, there had been all sorts of rumors about it in the outside world. However, nobody actually had a concrete answer. This was because shortly after the Earthfall Secret Land appeared, 3 of the 5 great super guilds had joined forces to monopolize that place. The 3 guilds had prohibited not only outsiders from entering but even their own internal members. The minimum condition to enter the Earthfall Secret Land had been being a Tier 4 core member. Nevertheless, one thing was certain. The Landfall Secret Land was a different dimension the Godslayer had created. The Secret Land had boasted an abundance of riches and/or veins. Magic crystals could also be found all around. It wasn't a place the outside world could compare to. Hence, Feng intended to take a look at the Earthfall Secret Land. However, the road leading to the Earthfall Secret Land was a treacherous one. After all, countless Tier 4 players had died in the Ruined Mountain Range in his previous life. Even Tier 5 players had fallen in the map. It wasn't a place that lone individuals could easily traverse. Therefore, Feng planned to tap the power of Crimson Emperor and Unyielding Soul for this endeavor. The Ruin Mountain range is extraordinary. Not to mention, the two of our guilds don't even have enough people to form a 100-man team of peak experts. I'm afraid it's going to be difficult to survive there, Illusory Words stated. How about we include some additional Tier 3 experts? That will increase our chances. Compared to Tier 3 peak experts, ordinary Tier 3 experts were far less prized. If they came across dangerous situations, they could have the ordinary experts scout ahead instead of putting the peak experts at risk. This method was frequently employed by superpowers when exploring forbidden lands. No. Shaking his head, Feng smiled and said, the ones participating in this expedition aren't just experts from your two guilds. Other experts will come with us as well. Other experts? Are they safe? Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart were confused by Feng's words. The operation this time was evidently a top secret. They couldn't afford to invite outsiders at all. Moreover, the operation had high requirements for players. They found it hard to believe that Zero Wing actually had other allies that could be trusted for this operation. They're safe. Their strength is also more than enough to participate in this operation, Feng said, chuckling. The Earthfall Secret Land was a place that the 5 great super guilds had considered a strategic resource. Once there, he naturally couldn't explore it together with Crimson Emperors and Unyielding Souls members. However, exploring the secret land by himself was also impossible. Hence, he needed to bring some other people with him. Only outsiders did not know that these people were actually part of Zero Wing. Afterward, Feng had Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart gather their guild's peak experts while he contacted the Azura Adventurer team. As for the Secret Covenant Tower, he tasked Fire Dance and the rest of Zero Wing's main force to handle it. After all, the expedition to the Ruin Mountain range would take a lot of time. Since Fire Dance and the others could already challenge their Tier 4 promotion quests, it would be a loss for them to accompany him. Black Dragon Empire, Thousand Rock Town. Several dozen flashes appeared on the town's teleportation array as Unyielding Souls and Crimson Emperor's peak experts arrived in this desolate border town. Although Thousand Rock Town was known as a town, there were hardly any NPCs there, let alone players, because of the town's proximity to the Ruin Mountain range. The neutral map was so dangerous that even NPCs wished to avoid it. After glancing at the desolate street, Blue Gown-eyed Feng, who stood nearby. She then asked Illusory Words curiously through a private conversation. Big Sis Illusory, who do you think guild leader Black Flame invited? In her opinion, their team, which consisted entirely of peak experts or better, was incredibly rare even in the entire God's domain. She found it inconceivable that Zero Wing could invite another team capable of rivaling theirs. Aside from the many peak experts, their team had Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart. The former was a cleric who stood at the pinnacle of God's domain, while the latter was a berserker with defense rivaling MT classes. There was also Blue Gown herself, who was the third-ranked Guardian Knight in Crimson Emperor's main force. At this stage of the game, only the 5 great super guilds would be capable of fielding such a team. I don't know. According to the information we gathered, only the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's Phoenix Rain might be of help. However, Phoenix Rain disappeared, so Zero Wing shouldn't have any other capable allies, Illusory Words replied, shaking her head. She too was curious about the allies Feng mentioned. Shortly after Illusory Words and Blue Gown spoke with each other, a dozen or so flashes appeared on the teleportation array once more. When these new arrivals walked out of the teleportation array, both Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart were shocked. Every one of these new arrivals radiated an astonishingly powerful aura. By the looks of it, not only had they unlocked their mana bodies, but their progress should have reached 100% as well. The callous man walking at the head of the group was someone even Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart had to be wary of. Lightning Demon Lifeless Thorn. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Lifeless Thorn was a ruthless person who persisted in challenging the various experts of God's domain. Some time ago he had even fought Stalwart Sky, one of the Battle Wolves' Wolf Kings, to a draw and was labeled by the Secret Pavilion as one of the Eastern Continent's top 10 rookies. At this time, Lifeless Thorn boasted not only a high level of 122 but also 7 pieces of epic equipment. And although he had hidden the glow effect of the spear he carried on his back, the archaic magic patterns engraved on it betrayed the spear's superiority to ordinary epic weapons. The Azura Adventurer team. Why are they here? Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart were dying of curiosity at the sight of Lifeless Thorn's group. After all, the Azura Adventurer team was currently a top adventurer team in God's domain. Moreover, it possessed an incredibly mysterious background. Not only did the Adventurer team conquer many high-difficulty large-scale team dungeons, but the Adventurer team's members also possessed unfathomable strength. Many of the Adventurer team's members had even reached the Spiritualization Realm 1, which allowed them to exhibit extraordinary combat power. Various superpowers had frantically tried to recruit the Adventurer team. However, the Azura Adventurer team had rejected all the offers. Although many superpowers had sent teams led by peak experts in retaliation, none of these teams succeeded. Moreover, these teams usually returned with heavy losses. Everyone's here. Let's go. Chapter 2754, Forbidden Land for Humans. Everyone's here? Illusory words and unyielding heart turned to Feng in astonishment. Could it be them? Not only did the Azura Adventurer team possess a reputation on the eastern continent of God's domain, but according to rumor, the Adventurer team also controlled more than half of the Ice Crystal world. All of the Adventurer team's core members were incredibly mysterious. From time to time, unheard-of powerful geniuses would also appear in the Adventurer team. It was also brooded about that the Azura Adventurer team had an incredibly powerful commander. This commander was elusive and mysterious. Rumor had it that even Lifeless Thorn couldn't survive one hit from this commander, and that Lifeless Thorn was challenging the various superpowers experts so crazily because he wanted to challenge Azura's commander once more. This situation instilled fear in the various superpowers. For this reason, God's domain superpowers suspected that the Azura Adventurer team had the backing of a mysterious and powerful force. In fact, they even suspected that this mysterious backer was someone from the upper zone's top layer. The Azura Adventurer team had arrogantly rejected many of the powers that wished to recruit it. This, in turn, resulted in many clashes between Azura and the various powers. And the more Azura fought, the more famous it became. Now, however, it was actually revealed that Azura had a good relationship with Zero Wing. They'll be moving with us later on, Feng said. He then nodded at Lifeless Thorn and the others in greeting. Actually, even Feng was somewhat surprised when he saw Lifeless Thorn and the others. He never thought that they would improve so much in the time he hadn't seen them. Now, Lifeless Thorn and the others surpassed Fire Dance and Zero Wing's other main force members in levels. Moreover, Lifeless Thorn's aura suggested that he was half a step into the domain realm already. Feng had to admit that the man was truly a battle maniac. Although his frenziedly challenging God's domain's various experts had earned him a lot of enemies, the experience he racked up allowed him to improve rapidly. As for Solitary 9, Yenya, Cleansing Whistle, and the others standing beside Lifeless Thorn, they too had made significant improvement. It was evident they were at the Flowing Water Realm already. Moreover, they weren't all that far from reaching the Void Realm either. If they received enlightenment now, they might very well break through to the next level immediately. Meanwhile, Feng's introduction of them rendered Lifeless Thorn and the others momentarily speechless. They nodded at illusory words and unyielding heart in acknowledgement, none of them showing any intention of speaking to the two strangers. At this time, Solitary 9 spoke to Feng excitedly through a private conversation, asking, "Commander, what do you think of the people we brought this time? Everyone's combat power is on par with peak experts. We didn't shame you, right?" "Indeed. I never thought you would manage to recruit so many talents," Feng said in astonishment as he studied Azura's team members. Quite a few of the Azura members present were people he was unacquainted with personally. However, he had heard of a few of these people in his previous life. All of them had been well-known solo experts in the game. Two of them had even reached Tier 5, only slightly inferior to Lifeless Thorn, who had reached the demigod standard. Feng truly had not imagined that Lifeless Thorn and the others would be able to recruit all these people into the Azura Adventurer team. Following this, Solitary 9 told Feng about recent events, mentioning that they had accidentally strayed into a magical place where time flowed at a completely different rate, and the players residing there were incredibly strong. In that magical place, Refinement Realm experts were considered third-rate. They were no big deal whatsoever. The players there were also very high-leveled, with some having even reached level 130 already. When Solitary 9 and the others visited that place, they had been utterly dumbfounded. During their stay in that magical place, they had frequently fought with the experts there. This allowed them to gain a lot of inspiration and improvement. Unfortunately, the system abruptly brought them back to the main continent for some reason. When they returned, their levels surpassed that of the superpowers peak experts by a large margin. Solitary Nine's tale surprised Feng. He never thought that God's domain would actually have such a magical area. However, when he remembered that Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose had fought in a different world for 80 years, he concluded that the situation Lifeless Thorn and the others had found themselves in was nothing to fuss about. Meanwhile, Crimson Emperors and Unyielding Souls members also finished their preparations to set off. Following which, everyone got on their flying mounts and flew toward the Ruined Mountain Range. The Ruined Mountain Range occupied a huge area on the continent of God's domain. According to players' estimates, the entire Ruined Mountain Range could rival the combined area of 5 or 6 empires and connected many places. The neutral map's level 120 region was only the periphery. If players wished to survive in the map's inner region, they would have to reach level 150 at the very least. As for the Ruined Mountain Range's core area, only level 180 plus, Tier 5 experts could enter there. Even level 200 Tier 4 experts wouldn't survive. After flying for 7 hours straight, Feng and the others finally saw a stretch of majestic mountains on the horizon. Just the mountains and the Ruined Mountain Range's periphery already reached heights of more than 30,000 meters. The sky of the mountain range was also shrouded in thunderclouds, and purple lighting arcs frequently appeared, bombarding the mountain range. Those seeing the Ruined Mountain Range for the first time were inevitably stunned by the magnificent and destructive scene before them. "We're descending," Feng instructed everyone after taking a look at the mountain range ahead. Flying mounts couldn't fly into the Ruined Mountain Range. If players wished to enter the neutral map, they had to rely on their own 2 feet. This was because even Tier 5 experts couldn't withstand the purple lightning. Even a level 200 Tier 5 Guardian Knight would fall after suffering 3 to 5 lightning strikes. Anyone who wished to fly inside the Ruined Mountain Range would have to reach Tier 6 first. Only then could they endure the purple lightning. Shortly afterward, Feng and the others arrived in a forest near the Ruined Mountain Range. They then stored their flying mounts one after another. "Once we enter the Ruined Mountain Range, everyone must stick to the team as closely as possible. You must not split off from the team under any circumstances. Otherwise, you'll be responsible for the consequences," Feng said after everyone had finished organizing themselves. "Remember, even if someone beside you is asking for help or I tell you to run for your lives, ignore everything. You must continue sticking to the team and advance. We also need to move as fast as possible." Upon hearing Feng's command, everyone present was surprised and puzzled. "Guild Leader Black Flame, are we supposed to ignore even your commands after we enter the map?" Blue Gown asked, her eyes filled with questions as she looked at Feng. Feng had clearly stated before that they needed to listen to his every command. Yet now he was telling them to ignore his commands once they entered the Ruined Mountain Range. His instructions were simply incomprehensible. "Yes. Once you enter, you can ignore any of my commands temporarily. You can also ignore everyone around you until the team comes to a halt," Feng said, nodding. "Why?" Illusory Words was also slightly confused by this situation. "Is there an illusion inside? I'm not sure either. In any case, the environment inside is very special. You will suffer from hallucinations once you enter. However, despite being hallucinations, everything you see isn't an illusion but real instead. Nobody can tell what is real or fake once inside. You can treat everything as real and you can also treat everything as fake," Feng said calmly. "The only thing I am certain of is that stopping inside means death." This was also why he had Crimson Emperor and Unyielding Soul dispatch only peak experts for this expedition. Anyone capable of becoming a peak expert would possess a firm mindset. Meanwhile, only with a firm mindset could one pass through the Ruined Mountain Range's periphery. How can there be such an environment? Blue Gown was shocked at Feng's explanation. As far as she knew, Forbidden Lands were merely places with harsh environments and strong monsters. Yet, the Ruined Mountain Range was actually a place that subjected players to hallucinations? At this moment, let alone Blue Gown, even Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart had grim expressions on their faces. Suddenly, they understood why the various superpowers experts had died unawares after entering the Ruined Mountain Range. In fact, it would be strange if they knew how they died. In this world, the scariest thing was the unknown. Meanwhile, the Ruined Mountain Range undoubtedly fulfilled this condition. Although they didn't know whether there were any monsters in the Ruined Mountain Range's periphery, just the unique environment alone made it a scary place. In fact, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to call it the scariest place they had visited since entering God's domain. The Ruined Mountain Range truly deserved its reputation as a forbidden land for humans. "Alright, let's head inside," Feng said after seeing that everyone had digested his words. Remember? Stick to the team. Afterward, Feng led the team to a mountain path that led into the ruined mountain range. The mountain path was relatively close by. Tier 3 players would take only a few minutes to cross the distance on foot. Less than 10 minutes later, the team of 100-plus players entered the ruined mountain range's perimeter. The moment everyone set foot into the neutral map, their mood grew solemn. They also followed Feng's command and stuck close to each other. The team advanced at a slow pace. Even the Tier 3 magical class players of the team managed to keep up easily. The ruined mountain range's environment was surprisingly better than everyone imagined. The map did not constantly sap their stamina or concentration. In fact, very little foreign energy invaded their bodies here. Around half an hour later, the team still had not come across a single monster. The whole mountain range was surprisingly safe and peaceful. Unlike what they imagined, the map wasn't infested with monsters that could easily trample over Tier 3 players. It seems the ruined mountain range isn't a big deal after all, Blue Gown said as she observed her surroundings. Under the circumstances, her initial expectation had disappeared completely. At Blue Gown's words, everyone in the team also started to feel that Feng had blown things out of proportion. He had only made them needlessly anxious. Blue, I'll have to rely on you once monsters start appearing later on, a level 119 female summoner said to Blue Gown. Sure, no problem. I'll make sure no monster gets near you, Blue Gown said confidently. The female summoner felt relieved at Blue Gown's assurance. The next moment, the sound of something splashing suddenly entered everyone's ears. The smell of blood also quickly spread into the surroundings. Meanwhile, everyone in the team stared at the female summoner and Blue Gown in shock. What? The female summoner stared at Blue Gown in consternation. Before anyone realized it, Blue Gown had stabbed the female summoner with her long sword, causing the latter to lose HP continuously. Blue Gown stared at the female summoner in confusion. A bright smile appearing on her face, she asked in a dissatisfied tone, "What, why?" After saying so, Blue Gown slashed the female summoner's throat, killing her. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. What's going on? Immediately, the people standing behind Blue Gown stared at her in shock and confusion. They couldn't understand why Blue Gown would suddenly attack a fellow teammate. Moreover, the smile on her face was unspeakably strange. The gaze she used to look at them also seemed as if she wasn't looking at humans. What's the matter with you guys? Blue Gown asked in confusion when she saw everyone looking at her warily. Why are you looking at me like that? However, despite her words, Blue Gown had an indescribably calm expression on her face. As if she had just stepped on an ant by the roadside, she was completely oblivious to the fact that she had just killed one of her teammates. Chapter 2755 Monster? Did Blue get possessed by a monster? What should we do now? Anyway, let's step back and keep our distance. Everyone slowly backed away from Blue Gown while staring at her in confusion. After all, Blue Gown possessed extraordinary strength as well as a hidden class for Guardian Knights. If they allowed her to get close to them, they would meet a similar fate to that female summoner. Meanwhile, upon noticing the players behind her stepping away, Blue Gown slowed her pace and looked at her teammates in confusion. What's the matter with you guys? While Blue Gown asked this question, the long sword in her hand bloomed with a dazzling light. The surrounding space even began to twist from the weapon's power. Not good. Be careful. She's using a Tier 3 legacy skill. We'll definitely die if we get hit. A Tier 3 expert familiar with Blue Gown warned Unyielding Souls experts. Afterward, this person dashed straight into the nearby forest. The next moment, several other peak experts from Crimson Emperor also hid in the nearby forest one after another. Upon seeing this, Unyielding Souls experts couldn't help hesitating over whether to fight or hide. On the other hand, Blue Gown was confused when she saw Crimson Emperor's members fleeing, turning toward the female summoner who should have long since been dead. Blue Gown asked, What do you think is wrong with them? Why did they look at me like that just now?" "I don't know either," the female summoner named Clear T answered, shaking her head. With a confused expression on her face, she said, "Why don't we follow them and take a look? It'll be bad if they move too far away from the team." "I guess you're right." Blue Gown nodded in agreement. Meanwhile, when Illusory Words, who stood some distance ahead of Blue Gown, noticed Blue Gown splitting away from the team, she promptly slowed her pace. "Blue, what are you doing?" Illusory Words shouted at Blue Gown in dissatisfaction. "Also, who have you been talking to all this time? Me? Turning toward Illusory Words, Blue Gown answered, haven't I been talking to Clear Tea all this time? Clear Tea. Looking at Blue Gown strangely, Illusory Words said, isn't Tea at the front of the team? The front. Blue Gown immediately turned to look at Clear Tea. However, before she realized it, the female summoner whom she had been chatting with merrily just a moment ago was nowhere to be seen. Where did she go? Wait, why have so many of our members gone missing? Illusory Words asked in confusion. I don't know what got into them, but they suddenly retreated into the forest over there, Blue Gown said, shaking her head. She too was confused at this situation. No. We were fooled. Illusory Words' complexion darkened when she saw that the entire rear section of the team had disappeared. Black Flame never planned to bring us into the ruined mountain range. He must have been planning to use the ruined mountain range's power to annihilate our peak experts. This, Blue Gown was momentarily stunned. Now that we've suffered such severe losses already, if we continue following him, he'll definitely lead us to our deaths. Our only choice is to kill him now. Illusory Words said in a whisper to Blue Gown while looking at the front at Feng, who was leading the team. I'll assist you. With your strength, even if you can't kill him in one hit, you should still be able to injure him heavily. At that time, I'll land the finishing blow on him. This despicable Black Flame. I knew he wasn't anything good. Blue Gown nodded in agreement to Illusory Words' plan. Blue Gown made her way toward Feng at a quick pace. When less than 100 yards separated them, Blue Gown suddenly disappeared, then reappeared behind Feng, a dazzling brilliance bursting out from the long sword she wielded. She swung her sword at the defenseless Feng. The next moment, countless spatial cracks appeared before Blue Gown and extended up to 100 yards away. Blue Gown, what are you doing? Unyielding Heart was startled when he saw Blue Gown suddenly attacking Feng. However, Blue Gown paid no attention to Unyielding Heart at all, launching another ruthless attack immediately after her first one. However, after executing her second attack, Blue Gown was dumbfounded. Where did he go? Looking ahead, Blue Gown failed to see anyone standing on the road before her, and she froze in stupefaction. By the time Blue Gown reacted to the situation, Feng was already standing beside her and looking at her quietly. At this time, Unyielding Heart also took action, grabbing Blue Gown's wrist, preventing her from attacking again. Blue Gown, what are you doing? Why are you attacking Guild Leader Black Flame? Have you lost your mind? Unyielding Heart questioned. Don't stop me. He's trying to kill us. Blue Gown said as she glared at Feng. He's trying to annihilate our peak experts using the ruined mountain range. If you don't believe me, look behind. Everyone at the back has disappeared already. Disappeared? Startled by Blue Gown's words, Unyielding Heart automatically turned to look to the team's rear. Upon seeing that fewer than 20 people remained in the team, Unyielding Heart paled. Guild Leader Black Flame, are you really? In this situation, even Unyielding Heart couldn't help doubting Feng's motives. Are you really trying to annihilate us? Before Unyielding Heart finished speaking, Feng had already unsheathed the abyssal blade. Before Blue Gown could react, Feng had cleaved Unyielding Heart in half, killing the latter instantly. You. Blue Gown was momentarily stunned when she saw Unyielding Heart getting killed. She then bellowed at Feng, you really are trying to annihilate the peak experts of our two guilds. I'll fight you to death. After Blue Gown said so, the intensity of her aura skyrocketed until it rivaled that of level 120 mythic monsters. However, before she could take action, Feng used Darkness Bind. Several dozen chains promptly appeared and restricted Blue Gown's movements. Despite her strength rivaling Tier 4 mythic monsters, all she could do was glare at Feng. She couldn't move her body in the slightest. Looking at Blue Gown, Feng said evenly, you need to calm down. Calm down? You want me to calm down? Blue Gown's eyes burned with a fiery rage. You killed Vice Guild Leader Heart, yet you want me to calm down? Take a clear look at the situation. Feng shouted while releasing his killing intent and directing it at Blue Gown. The intense killing intent instantly shocked Blue Gown out of her anger. And as if having realized something, she then gawked at her surroundings. What the hell is going on with me? Before Blue Gown realized it, more people had appeared around her. Unyielding Heart stood among these new additions and was currently staring at her with a confused look on his face. Blue, what's gotten into you? Why are you trying to kill Guild Leader Black Flame so desperately? Illusory Words asked, similarly surprised by Blue Gown's actions. Everyone had been advancing carefully before. Yet, for some reason, Blue Gown had suddenly charged up to Feng and attacked him. Fortunately, Feng had reacted quickly and dodged her attack in time. An illusion? I got caught in an illusion? Blue Gown was stunned by this situation. Everything she experienced before felt too real, so real that she didn't even notice that something was amiss. What's going on here? Unyielding Heart asked in surprise. Does this mean you'll get trapped in an illusion even if you're just walking? However, before Unyielding Heart and the others could figure out what was going on, Feng suddenly stabbed the abyssal blade into Blue Gown. What are you doing, Guild Leader Black Flame? Illusory Words asked, startled. Feng was a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. Any random attack of his could reap millions of HP from mythic monsters. Killing Blue Gown, who had less than 3 million HP, would take no more than a hit. However, what occurred next made everyone's jaws drop. This was because Feng's attack failed to kill Blue Gown. A damage value exceeding 4 million had appeared above Blue Gown's head, yet the Guardian Knight's HP bar had fallen by only a small chunk, losing barely 3% of her HP. How is this possible? Unyielding Heart couldn't help doubting his eyes. For Blue Gown to lose only around 3% of her HP despite suffering over 4 million damage, her maximum HP had to exceed 200 million. A player having 200 million HP? Did a monster replace Blue? Illusory Words was also stunned by this situation. This was Illusory Words' first time seeing a monster transforming into a player. Moreover, the Blue Gown before her looked identical to the real one. However, before anyone could snap out of their surprise, Feng suddenly appeared beside Illusory Words and slashed at her with the abyssal blade. -6,434,654. Damage exceeding 6 million appeared above Illusory Words' head. However, similar to Blue Gown, Illusory Words lost less than 3% of her HP from the attack. Illusory Words looked at Feng strangely, failing to understand why Feng had attacked her all of a sudden. Meanwhile, Unyielding Heart, who saw all of this, was at a loss. He simply couldn't figure out what was happening right now. Guild Leader Black Flame, what exactly are you doing? After suffering an attack, Illusory Words hurriedly stepped back and used a healing spell on herself, instantly replenishing her HP back to full. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. What am I doing? Chuckling, Feng said, of course I'm getting rid of you monsters. Monsters? What kind of joke are you making? How am I a monster? I'm a bona fide player. Illusory Words protested, her eyes wide with confusion as she looked at Feng. She then explained hurriedly, there must be a problem here. When everyone on the team saw that Illusory Words did not retaliate, combined with the sincerity in her voice, they had to nod their heads in agreement, feeling that there was definitely a problem here. If Illusory Words really were a monster, she should have retaliated after Feng attacked her. She wouldn't be trying to explain herself. In the meantime, Blue Gown looked at herself in shock. She couldn't believe that she had transformed into a monster. Am I actually the transformation of a monster? Chapter 2756, True Forbidden Land. Blue Gown and Illusory Words' bizarre performance and words stunned everyone. Were Blue Gown and Illusory Words monsters or not? Previously, when they came across monsters, all they needed to do was attack the said monsters. If they couldn't defeat the monsters, they could just run. Now, however, they couldn't even tell whether the monsters they faced were actual monsters. What were they supposed to do in this situation? Immediately, a deathly silence fell over the entire team as everyone turned to look at their teammates, afraid that the one standing beside them was actually a monster in disguise. Illusory Words and Blue Gown also warily eyed each other. This weird scene was definitely a first for everyone. However, after this strange atmosphere lasted for several seconds, the sunny sky suddenly darkened. Lightning and thunder filled the surroundings. Before Blue Gown realized it, the people around her had disappeared. Simultaneously, a 6-meter-tall monster with a huge mouth and ethereal body had appeared beside her, and it had devoured half of her soul already. Despite having noticed this monster, she could only stare at it quietly like an immobile puppet. She couldn't move her body even if she wanted to. However, the next moment, a magic blade pierced the heart of this monster. The monster let loose an ear-piercing scream that made Blue Gown feel as if her head would burst. What's going on? Blue Gown, whose body currently resembled an ethereal soul, was all at sea. Right now, she truly could not distinguish what was real from what was fake. It was as if she had woken up from a dream, only to end up in another dream. Before she could react to the situation, the injured monster pounced on her once more, intending to devour the delicacy before it. Meanwhile, Blue Gown, who had returned to her physical body, was utterly powerless against the monster. Just being close to it petrified her and gave her a pounding headache. She couldn't put up any resistance whatsoever. Soul Devourer, Soul Monster, Great Lord, level 124 HP 440 million. However, before the Soul Devourer could reach Blue Gown, several magic swords shot through it in rapid succession. Minus 71,514,654. Minus 35,164,412. Several dozen terrifying damage values flashed above the Soul Devourer one after another, the Great Lord's HP zeroing out straightaway. The monster then dispersed into particles of light, leaving behind a dozen or so crystal fragments in its place. Black Flame? Blue Gown looked at Feng in confusion, having fallen into a mentally weakened state, her voice tremulous with uncertainty. You sustained some mental attacks. Nearly half of your concentration was consumed as well. It's best if you don't move around recklessly, Feng said as he looked at Blue Gown. Fortunately, you managed to walk out of that area. I wouldn't have been able to save you otherwise. Mental attacks. Blue Gown was taken aback. How is this possible? This was her first time hearing this term. Moreover, everything she had experienced before felt real. Such a situation was simply unheard of. She had experienced earth-shattering battles in God's domain before, but never such a terrifying illusion. She found it hard to imagine that a monster was actually capable of executing such an attack. Nothing is impossible in God's domain, especially in this forbidden land for humans, Feng said as he met Blue Gown's incredulous gaze. Shaking his head, he said, monsters in God's domain aren't limited to physical and magical attacks. They have many unknown ways to attack and lay traps. Even if a player possesses combat power far surpassing a monster's, the player will still get killed if they aren't careful. Take these monsters that are capable of employing mental attacks, for example. Even if you have superior basic attributes, so long as you get caught in their mental attack, if you don't have incredibly strong willpower and the concentration to break through their mental bindings, you will still get killed. This was also why it was important for players to improve not only their basic attributes but also their concentration. During the early stages of God's domain, players would rarely encounter mental attacks. Those that did wouldn't notice it due to their ignorance of mental attacks. However, past level 120 and after the first major update took place, mental attacks would appear much more frequently. Meanwhile, if players did not possess sufficiently strong willpower, they would still be helpless against mental attacks even if they had incredibly powerful basic attributes. Take Blue Gown for example. She had been trapped inside the Soul Devourer's mental space and couldn't escape at all. Fortunately, she did not die inside the mental space. Otherwise, even if he managed to save her from the Soul Devourer, all he would have saved would be an empty husk. In God's domain, dying inside a mental space was no different from dying in the outside world. To put it simply, one would suffer a soul death. This was also why most players in his previous life dared not offend Tier 5 NPCs, as some of them wielded mental attacks. Meanwhile, suffering a soul death was much worse than a physical death. Worst case scenario, one would lose one's account and have to start all over again. After Feng finished speaking, he resumed controlling his magic swords to rescue the others. This is a true forbidden land? As Blue Gown looked at the death and destruction in her surroundings, she finally realized that the Ruin Mountain range was much scarier than she thought. Compared to the battles she had experienced before, the one just now was on an entirely different level. Moreover, she had never thought that there would be such forms of combat in a virtual reality game. Despite the Soul Devourer's basic attributes being inferior to hers, she had been utterly helpless against it. When that Soul Devourer approached her earlier, she had suffered an intense headache. Her head had hurt so much that she couldn't control her body, let alone fight. Blue Gown wasn't the only victim of a Soul Devourer's attack. Several dozen other people had been caught as well. Of those present, only 19 people managed to avoid the Soul Devourer's attacks. Of the 19 people, the Azura Adventurer team had an overwhelming advantage in numbers. 8 of the Adventurer team's members were unscathed, compared to the 5 members each of Crimson Emperor and Unyielding Soul. At this time, everyone was desperately trying to save those who had been caught. However, some of the victims were beyond rescue already. The devouring speed of the Soul Devourers varied. Some were slow to finish their prey while others were quick. Evidently, some players had stronger resistance to mental attacks, while other players had weaker resistance. Those with weak resistance didn't have much of their souls left at this point. When Blue Gown noticed Azura's cleansing whistle, who was roughly the same age as herself, fighting a soul devourer, she was stunned. Am I that much weaker than her? Blue Gown couldn't help her surprise and confusion as she watched Cleansing Whistle. She considered herself one of the best among her peers. Her guild even recognized her as one of the top 3 talents of the younger generation. Yet, she was actually inferior to Cleansing Whistle, someone whose combat standard hadn't even reached the Void Realm yet. However, before Blue Gown could recover from her shock, she felt a chill envelop her body as if something was staring directly at her soul. What? This is a lie, right? How can we fight such a thing? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Blue Gown wasn't the only person who felt this sensation. Everyone experienced it. When Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart looked in the direction of this feeling source, they trembled in fear. A 30-meter-tall, 3-headed monster loomed over the team, and every step it took made everyone's soul shudder in fear. Tadelia the Soul Singer, Realm Lord. Superior Mythic, Level 128 HP 20,500,000,000. Chapter 2757, 15 seconds. Everyone gasped at Tadelia's appearance. A Realm Lord was in existence close to rivaling world bosses. Not to mention, Tadelia was a Realm Lord of the Ruined Mountain Range. Its strength was most likely on par with that of world bosses in the outside world. This is the terror of a forbidden land for humans? Mu Lingsha smiled wryly at the sight of the Soul Singer. She finally understood why none of the various superpowers expert teams managed to make it out of the Ruined Mountain Range alive. It would be strange if they did. At this time, not only was half of their team dead, but they also had to fight a large number of Soul Devourers. Although the Soul Devourers weren't particularly strong, most of the surviving members of their team couldn't fully exhibit their combat power either. The Soul Devourers dealt astonishingly powerful mental damage. Even after players broke free from the Soul Devourers' mental shackles, the mental damage still existed, affecting their brains. The consequent headaches prevented the players from executing delicate actions, which in turn lowered their combat standards by 2 ranks on average. Now, Void Realm experts could exhibit combat standards only at the Refinement Realm, while Domain Realm experts' combat standards were at the Void Realm. On the other hand, the Soul Devourers all had combat standards at the Trial Tower's 6th floor. They could undoubtedly be considered first-rate experts, not much inferior to ordinary Tier 3 experts in combat standards. With the addition of a Realm Lord, there was no way their team could get out of this situation alive. Among those still standing, only Lifeless Thorn, Solitary 9, Yenya, and Cleansing Whistle remained relatively calm, continuing to systematically slay the Soul Devourers, troubling the players around them. 9, Thorn and Yenya, help me hold the boss for 15 seconds. Feng said after saving another person from the Soul Devourers. Upon hearing Feng's command, Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart couldn't help doubting their ears. They're still going to fight in this situation? Their opponents consisted of several hundred Soul Devourers and 1 Realm Lord. The only thing they could and should do now was run away. The battle recovery of a monster of Tadelia's rank allowed it to regenerate 2% of its HP every 5 seconds. In other words, the Realm Lord could recover 410 million HP per 5 seconds. That was basically killing a Great Lord of the same level every 5 seconds. If they couldn't accomplish that, they wouldn't even be able to get Tadelia's HP below 98%. Meanwhile, their team currently had fewer than 30 people alive, nearly half of them in a mentally weakened state and incapable of combat. With Tadelia's defense as a superior mythic thrown in, their team's attacks would, at best, give the Realm Lord an itch. 15 seconds. After briefly calculating their chances, Solitary 9 nodded and said, "No problem. However, 15 seconds really is the most I can do." Tadelia's mental influence was too powerful. Even Solitary 9 felt a little overwhelmed. "No problem. If you can't handle it, I'll take over." Lifeless Thorn said, excitement flashing in his eyes as he looked at the approaching Soul Singer. Previously, killing monsters for EXP had been a chore for him. After all, none of the monsters he fought allowed him to improve. He was killing them solely for the sake of leveling up. However, after setting foot in the Ruined Mountain Range, he finally felt that he was truly fighting a battle. Previously, he would get the exhilarating feeling of having one move decide his life or death only when fighting peak experts. Now, however, the Soul Devourers were giving him the same feeling. It was simply wonderful. As for Tadelia, the Realm Lord was an existence that could even terrify him. This was the kind of opponent he had been hankering for. Alright, let's hurry up and head over. If we wait until the boss arrives, the others might get dragged into the fight. Yenya said, her head aching slightly when she saw Lifeless Thorn's excited expression. Solitary 9 and Lifeless Thorn activated the power of darkness, boosting their basic attributes by a large margin. Now, both of them were comparable with Tier 4 existences. The next moment, the two melee players turned into streaks of light as they charged at Tadelia. Meanwhile, Yenya, a druid, chanted an incantation and flew toward the Realm Lord. Simultaneously, she cast a layer of life protection on both Solitary 9 and Lifeless Thorn, the spell capable of absorbing some of the damage they took and converting it into HP. Roar. Tadelia bellowed in anger when it saw two ants charging at it, its roar echoing throughout the ruined mountain range's outermost area. As its roar spread, an invisible mental attack struck everyone. Aside from Feng, everyone present groaned in pain. Good. You really are powerful. After suffering Tadelia's mental attack, which was much stronger than its ever-present mental influence, Lifeless Thorn turned deathly pale. However, when he looked at the 30-meter-tall Realm Lord, not only did he not grow fearful of the boss, but the fighting spirit in his eyes even burned brighter. He raised his spear and transformed into a lightning bolt shooting at Tadelia. Tier 3 legacy skill Lightning Flash. With the power of darkness as buff, this attack pierced through space itself. As if he had teleported, Lifeless Thorn instantly appeared before the Soul Singer. So fast. This scene surprised Unyielding Heart. There had been a 200-yard gap between Tadelia and Lifeless Thorn, yet the latter had crossed this distance instantly. Unyielding Heart wasn't sure he could react to such a speed even if he activated his Berserk skill. Boom. A deafening boom echoed throughout the mountains. The next moment, a black shadow fell from the sky and struck the ground heavily, the impact of the collision creating a crater over 24 meters in diameter. Inside the crater, Lifeless Thorn stood, propping himself up with his spear. His hands on the spear trembled and blood leaked out from a corner of his mouth. It was evident he had sustained a major blow. His HP had fallen by more than 460,000. What happened? Blue Gown, who was watching the clash from a distance, was dumbfounded. Lifeless Thorn's attack carried incredible power and speed. Even an actual Tier 4 mythic monster should have suffered a serious injury from it. Yet, not only did Lifeless Thorn fail to inflict any damage on Tadelia, but he had even taken damage? Moreover, Lifeless Thorn had lost close to 10% of his HP despite the life protection cast on him. At this rate, without additional healing he would definitely die after 6 or 7 more exchanges. Is this monster really just a superior mythic? Everyone couldn't help doubting their eyes as they stared at the intact Soul Singer. They had seen superior mythic monsters before. Some of them had even killed one before. However, compared to those superior mythic monsters, Tadelia was like a completely different creature. However, when Feng, who was currently incanting, saw this scene, he wasn't surprised at all. The early stages of God's Domain served to let players adapt to God's Domain's combat style. The main God system had not only provided players with many benefits but also weakened the monsters in the game. In fact, even the level 100+ monsters that players felt were strong weren't actually at their peak condition. They were still suppressed to a certain degree. However, that was not the case for the monsters in Forbidden Lands. The monsters in these locations weren't subject to the main God system suppression and could exert 100% of their combat power. In Forbidden Lands, mythic monsters were beyond the capabilities of ordinary Tier 3 teams. Tier 3 players would need top-quality equipment and various support tools to even stand a chance. Moreover, the team would also need many experts with Berserk skills. Otherwise, only one outcome awaited the team: annihilation. Not to mention, Tadelia was a bona fide superior mythic. If Feng himself fought Tadelia right now, he definitely wouldn't have an easy time. They would need at least 6 Tier 4 players to defeat this boss. Otherwise, challenging the Realm Lord would be sheer suicide. This was why he had tasked Lifeless Thorn's trio with only holding back Tadelia for 15 seconds. Asking them to hold the Realm Lord back for even a few seconds more was a luxury they couldn't afford. Subsequently, Solitary 9 and Lifeless Thorn activated their life-saving skills one after another to defend against Tadelia's attacks. Even Yenya, who served as the healer of the trio, had to activate her power of darkness. Without the additional basic attributes, she would have died from any random stray attack that hit her. One time, to defend against Tadelia's trampling, Solitary 9 activated his Tier 3 shield wall and interposed himself between the Realm Lord and his two companions. However, even with his life-saving skill activated, the resulting shockwave still sent the trio flying several dozen meters away. Both Lifeless Thorn and Yenya lost over 1 million HP from the attack, whereas Solitary 9 lost over 3 million HP. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Every second of battle placed immense pressure on the trio. Every moment they fought, Tadelia felt as if death would claim them in the next second. The players spectating from afar were stupefied at this scene. This was the first time they truly understood how terrifying a superior mythic monster could be. If not for Lifeless Thorn's group having activated their berserk skills, the trio would have most likely been killed instantly. "Commander, are you not done yet?" Solitary 9 asked Feng through a private conversation. Previously he thought that it would be a joke if he couldn't hold Tadelia for 15 seconds. However, he now realized that 15 seconds was truly a long time. Good job. At this time, Feng had also finished chanting the final verse recorded in the Bible of Darkness. "Leave the rest to me." Chapter 2758, Bible of Darkness's True Power. Upon hearing Feng's words, Solitary 9, Lifeless Thorn, and Yenya promptly stopped attracting Tadelia's attention and dashed over to Feng. They chose to run to him because only their commander had a way to hold Tadelia back. If they ran in any other direction, Tadelia would definitely chase them down and crush them. Tadelia strode toward Feng step by step. Not only did Tadelia shake the ground with every step it took, but the mental influence it exerted over the rest of the team also increased. Some of the resting players, such as Blue Gown, even started holding their heads in pain. "Are we going to fight it?" Illusory Words couldn't help frowning at this situation. She simply couldn't see any way for their team to defeat Tadelia. Not only did Tadelia possess over 2 billion HP, but its combat standard was superior to ordinary refinement realm experts. Its speed was so fast that even a domain realm expert like herself could barely keep up. Such speed simply wasn't something Tier 3 players could cope with, and even a Tier 4 player like Feng would, at best, just match its speed. Moreover, Tadelia's strength was something only Tier 4 MTs could hope to stop. If a swordsman like Feng tried to tank one of the Realm Lord's attacks, he would definitely end up miserable. However, when Tadelia was only 3 steps away from Feng, the connections completed. Feng smiled as he closed the Bible of Darkness and looked at Tadelia. "Let's start the second round then." As soon as Feng closed the Bible of Darkness, the stormy skies above the valley shattered and transformed into a dark space covering thousands of yards. Looking at the darkness, everyone present could faintly sense that it was connected to an ancient and terrifying space. Just the aura leaking out from the dark space was enough to roil the valley's mana. The next moment, a gigantic stone door several hundred meters tall fell through the dark space and smashed into the valley, causing powerful tremors to spread throughout the valley. When Tadelia looked at this ancient door, a deep sense of fear appeared in its eyes. How can there be such a terrifying existence in this world? Unyielding Heart was shocked as he looked at the massive stone door before him. This door was undoubtedly the most terrifying item he had seen in God's domain thus far. Just looking at it allowed him to understand just how scary it was. Every magic pattern and rune engraved on the door functioned to seal its power. Whatever existence stood behind the door could most likely obliterate him with just a small strand of its power. For a moment, he even had the feeling that the opening of this door would mark the beginning of all disasters. He's not planning to open this door, right? Illusory Words eyed the stone door nervously. The door before her looked far too ominous. Its appearance alone filled her with an indescribable aversion and terror, a terror easily 100 times stronger than the fear she felt for Tadelia. However, before Illusory Words could continue this line of thought, the door began opening by itself slowly. Darkness, silence, and despair. For a moment, it felt as if all the negative emotions in the world were pouring out of this stone door, and even Feng felt uncomfortable in this situation. As for everyone else, their faces paled, and they knelt on the ground involuntarily, none of them daring to look at the stone door directly. "Oh mans? No. You're not?" Suddenly, words spoken in the abstruse demonic language flowed out of the door. Although none of the players present were knowledgeable of the language of demons, they understood what the spoken words conveyed. For a time, everyone was confused. "I never thought that after so many years, you existences would be the next to summon this door." Following these words, A three-eyed, 10-meter-tall humanoid demon clad in black armor walked out of the stone door. The instant Tadelia saw this demon, horror overwhelmed it. It was as if the Realm Lord had just seen death itself. Actually, Feng himself felt dread at the humanoid demon's appearance. He never dreamed he would summon this demon. The Dark Abyss had a total of 108 demon princes, who stood at the peak of the great demons. All of them were existences second only to demon kings, and they could be considered half-step demon kings. Meanwhile, the humanoid demon standing before him was Ferbero, the Lord of the Dead. His strength ranked 21st among all great demons. Wait, how weak? Ferbero muttered as he looked at himself, his voice filled with dissatisfaction. He then looked at Feng, who held the Bible of Darkness, and said coldly, "You should know what you have done. That book isn't something you should possess, so hand it to me. This is also your only way out. Otherwise, what awaits you is eternal death." As soon as Ferbero finished speaking, a powerful sense of oppression descended on Feng, one so uncomfortable that his expression turned ugly. As expected of one of the 108 demon princes. Its mental oppression is on par with Tier 5 existences, Feng sighed ruefully. Although he had long since known that the gap between Tier 4 and Tier 5 was massive, he still couldn't help feeling helpless when experiencing the might of a half-step demon king. Luckily, Feng wielded the Bible of Darkness, which restricted the methods Ferbero could use to target him. Otherwise, the demon prince could have killed him instantly. Meanwhile, as Ferbero subjected Feng to his mental oppression, the Bible of Darkness also sensed the offense. Immediately, chains appeared around the demon prince's body. The instant these chains appeared, Ferbero's mental oppression weakened drastically. Now, the mental oppression no longer posed any threat to Feng whatsoever. This damned contract. I will break free from this binding one day and obtain true freedom. Ferbero bellowed in rage as he glared at the pitch-black chains wrapped around his body. He then looked at Feng and said coldly, "Although that book prevents me from doing anything to you, don't think that you have full control over me. I can tell that you don't have much time left, based on those curses and bindings on your body. That book cannot save you. Only I can help you. That won't be necessary. I will only become your puppet if I believe you," Feng said, shaking his head while smirking contemptuously. After reaching Tier 4, he had gained an inkling about the problem plaguing his soul. Initially, he thought that with the benefits from his promotion, the problems he faced would stabilize. However, it turned out that wasn't the case at all. His problems were far greater than he imagined. This feeling became even more obvious after he had used the Bible of Darkness. The Bible of Darkness had been secretly eroding his soul all this time. He couldn't help but admit that this godlike item truly couldn't be controlled easily. It was much more dangerous than magic weapons. However, it was also impossible for him to abandon the Bible of Darkness. The road to reaching higher tiers was incredibly difficult. Only by grasping every available opportunity would he have a chance of becoming a god. Otherwise, everything he did would be for naught. One example would be the soul mark he received from a faux saint devourer he defeated some time ago. It was precisely because he had exploited this opportunity that he had managed to strengthen his soul, which, in turn, strengthened his resistance to that mysterious NPC soul curse. Otherwise he wouldn't have survived until now. Feng then looked at Ferbero and said, "I might not be able to control you completely, but you should know that as your summoner, I can forcibly control part of your power." The Bible of Darkness was his greatest assurance in venturing to the ruined mountain range this time. Venturing deep into the neutral map with just his personal strength was impossible. After all, Tadelia alone was already more than enough to make him flee. "You'll regret this. Controlling the power of demons is beyond you. The more you use it, the deeper you will sink until eventually your soul is consumed completely. Thank you for the warning, but don't think you demons will have an easy time devouring me." After saying so, Feng used the Bible of Darkness to erase Ferbero's consciousness and gain control over a portion of the Demon Prince's strength. A level 135 Demon Prince. Even with just 70% of Ferbero's strength, he could roam about the ruined mountain range's outer area without any worries. The conversation between Feng and Ferbero lasted for only a short moment. Hence, Tadelia, who had been petrified by the stone door and the Lord of the Dead, was still idle. However, after Feng took control of Ferbero's body, Tadelia immediately noticed something amiss. The Demon Prince's aura and mental oppression had weakened significantly. Moreover, Ferbero could display hostility toward it now. After realizing what had just happened, Tadelia pounced on Feng without hesitation, sending one of its mountain-sized claws smashing ruthlessly at the tiny human. Feng immediately felt as if the space around him had compressed 100-fold. Not only did his body feel a lot heavier, but even time had started slow. Tier 4 innate skill, Sundering Earth. This was the first time Tadelia had resorted to a skill. Previously, when fighting ants like Lifeless Thorn, it couldn't even be bothered to use skills. However, the only thing on its mind right now was to kill Feng as quickly as possible. Under intense pressure from the space around him, Feng looked up at Tadelia and smiled. "You're too late." Even before Feng finished speaking, Ferbero, who stood in front of Feng, waved his hand abruptly, and a pitch-black spear of flames condensed in his hand. He then swung the spear at Tadelia's approaching claw. Although Ferbero's spear was made of flames, it did not feel scorching at all. On the contrary, it gave off an extreme chill that froze the surrounding space. Time itself seemed to freeze momentarily. Boom. Space shattered and turned into nothingness. The impact of the collision between the two attacks caused the ground to sink. With the exception of Feng, the resulting shockwave also sent everyone flying over 500 yards away and inflicted damage on them ranging between tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. As for Tadelia, its massive body shot backward over 100 yards, leveling the terrain in its path. The next moment, Illusory Words, Unyielding Heart, and the others who got blown away gaped in shock as they looked at Tadelia. Chapter 2759, Half-Step Demon King. Is this the real trump card Black Flame has been hiding all this time? Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart were shocked as they stared at the three-eyed demon hovering proudly in the sky. At the same time, they revealed bitter smiles on their faces. Ferbero, Lord of the Dead. Demon Prince. Level 135 HP 13 billion. They had long known that people like Feng would always keep a trump card hidden. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come to the dangerous Ruin Mountain range even though he had reached Tier 4. However, they never imagined that Feng's trump card would be this terrifying. The man had actually summoned a demon prince from the dark abyss and controlled it like a puppet to fight for him. A demon prince was an existence capable of rivaling Tier 5 existences. In terms of life rating, a demon prince was above even superior mythic monsters. Not to mention, Ferbero was even a demon prince with a title. Calling him a half-step demon king wouldn't be an exaggeration. If the various superpowers were to find out about this power, they would most likely have very ugly expressions on their faces. Any demon prince that possessed a title had earned their title by slaughtering countless people in God's domain. In fact, these titled demon princes were responsible for the destruction of some kingdoms in God's domain. For an existence capable of single-handedly destroying an entire kingdom, destroying a super guild's guild city would be child's play. In reality, Feng himself had also entertained the same fantasies as Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart. However, these thoughts remained merely thoughts. After his promotion to Tier 4, both his concentration and mana perception had gained a qualitative improvement. Thanks to these improvements, he discovered a small trace of dark energy lingering around his soul. The Bible of Darkness possessed incredible power. In fact, some legendary items would even seem weak compared to it. This situation was inconsistent with God's domain's rules. In God's domain, one had to pay a price corresponding to the power gained. This was the balance of God's domain. However, the Bible of Darkness didn't seem balanced to him. The power it offered its wielder was far greater than the cost of using it. Now, the Bible of Darkness's detriments were thoroughly revealed. His soul had become tainted with dark energy. Although the dark energy lingering around his soul was incredibly weak, its purity was exceptionally high, equal to the energy found in 7 luminaries crystals. Ordinary power couldn't expel it. And the more he used the Bible of Darkness's power, the stronger and purer this dark energy became. Particularly when he summoned Ferbero, the rate at which this dark energy grew had skyrocketed. Hence, unless absolutely necessary, he didn't dare casually use the Bible of Darkness's power for now. Meanwhile, as everyone was stunned by Ferbero's power, Tadelia, who had been knocked backward, let loose a deafening roar like an enraged beast. Tadelia's originally translucent body turned blood red and enlarged significantly. Now, the Realm Lord easily reached a height of 50 meters. Simultaneously, a ripple of power spread from its body, reaching 500 yards away and causing the ground to sink. What a strong gravity domain. Feng frowned when Tadelia's gravity domain reached him. Despite his mana domain and Tier 4 physique, moving inside Tadelia's gravity domain was actually difficult. Now he couldn't even exhibit half of his normal speed, let alone his strength. If Tier 3 players stood within this gravity domain right now, they would most likely be crushed to death. Fortunately, Feng, whom Feng controlled, wasn't particularly affected by this gravity domain. His speed and strength had been reduced by only 20% or so. He still held an advantage over Delia. So this is the Demon Prince's power? Feng was astonished by this situation. Despite both him and Feng being Tier 4 existences, there was a tremendous gap between them. He only had basic control over Feng's body. Utilizing Feng's mana and frightening concentration was beyond him. While these two aspects might not seem very important, they were crucial for Tier 4 existences to maximize the use of their basic attributes. At this time, Feng couldn't exhibit even 10% of Feng's true combat power. Despite that, Feng could still overwhelm Delia. All Feng needed to do now was control Feng and have the Demon Prince pin down the Soul Singer. If everyone else helped out in attacking Delia, slaying the superior mythic wouldn't be impossible. However, Delia had no intention of letting Feng realize his plans. Chanting an incantation, the Realm Lord repeatedly shattered the ground around itself and gathered the scattered rubble. In just 3 seconds, a meteorite with a 400-yard radius had formed in midair. A Tier 4 curse? Feng's complexion darkened when he saw the meteorite. A Tier 4 curse cast by a superior mythic would possess power at the Tier 5 standard. A single strike from such an attack was more than enough to demolish a city's defensive magic array. As a Tier 4 player, if he got struck by this attack, he would die without question. At this time, let alone Feng, even Illusory Words, Unyielding Heart, and the other players standing over 500 yards away were stunned by Delia's attack. Helpless smiles appeared on their faces. Once this Tier 4 curse landed, none of them would survive. They couldn't even interrupt the spell. Damn it. Why can't I use his mana? Feng felt a huge headache in this situation. If Feng were to rely on only his physical body, the Demon Prince definitely wouldn't be able to shrug off a Tier 4 curse. Moreover, even if Feng could endure the attack, both Feng and the rest of his team couldn't. Escaping was also impossible at this point. After all, the activation of a Tier 4 curse would place a seal on the space of the affected region. Aside from shattering the Tier 4 curse directly, the only other way to survive a Tier 4 curse would be to endure it. However, neither of these two options were viable for Feng. If he couldn't control Feng's mana, he wouldn't be able to use any of the Demon Prince's skills or spells. He could only have the Demon Prince fight hand to hand. While Feng was thinking about how to resolve this Tier 4 curse, Delia completed the incantation for the Tier 4 curse meteorite collapse. Boom. The next moment, the enormous meteorite that had taken shape fell from the sky like a real meteor. Damn it. Seeing the descending meteorite, Feng gritted his teeth and began calling the dark energy hidden in the depths of his soul. It's all or nothing now. As a tool capable of controlling all demons, the Bible of Darkness shouldn't be limited to turning demons into simple meat puppets. Feng believed it could exert further control over them. Meanwhile, a demon's power wasn't limited to just mana. They also had access to the terrifying power of darkness. In other words, the power of darkness was the source of strength for demons. Yet, when Feng used the Bible of Darkness, he could perform only simple manipulation of demons. This obviously didn't seem right. The instant Feng manipulated the strand of dark energy within his soul, it actually formed a connection with Feng's source of power. This is... Feng was stupefied. At this moment he felt that he was Feng. He now could see what Feng saw and feel what Feng felt. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Is this what it feels like to be in existence approaching Tier 5 Demon Kings? Not only did Feng not feel the slightest bit anxious or fearful of the descending meteorite, but it even looked like a toy to him. Be it the surrounding mana, terrain, or sky, he could now perceive everything with extreme clarity. Even the operating principles of the profound magic elements looked far less complex in his opinion. Meanwhile, just when everyone else on the team shook their heads and gave up, Feng suddenly raised a hand under Feng's control and directed it at the massive meteorite. The next moment, a gigantic hand made of mana appeared out of thin air and grabbed the meteorite, then lightly squeezed. Boom. A deafening explosion occurred in midair, and the meteorite, which was over 400 meters in radius, instantly shattered into dust. Space around the hand also transformed into a black void. Chapter 2760, Illusory Sword slays Realm Lord. The sky shattered, and the resulting void storm dyed the sky black as it threatened to devour everything on this land. The void storm was so powerful that even Tier 4 players would suffer severe damage or death if they got too close. So strong. He crushed a Tier 4 curse with his hand. Is he really just a Tier 4 demon? Everyone present gasped at the power of the demon Prince Feng controlled. Ferbero's might had thoroughly shattered their perception of Tier 4 demons in God's domain. In fact, even Feng himself felt shocked by this outcome. Amazing. A demon prince can actually control mana to such a terrifying level. No wonder they're known as half-step demon kings. Their actual combat power is definitely at the Tier 5 standard. Previously, Feng had merely thought to use Ferbero's mana to resist Tedelia's Tier 4 curse. However, the mana hand the demon prince conjured had actually shattered the Tier 4 curse. The demon prince's power was beyond his imagination. Nevertheless, the most amazing aspect about Ferbero would have to be the mana he could condense. The strength of the condensed mana surpassed even Feng's mana when he executed Holy Devour. Meanwhile, Ferbero had already exhibited such astounding mana just by casually condensing it into the shape of a hand. Had the demon prince executed a mana technique just now, the result would have definitely been mind-blowing. The power of the attack might even reach the intermediate Tier 5 standard. Usually, if a superior mythic monster used a Tier 4 curse, the spell's power would only be at the entry level of Tier 5, not even reaching the basic Tier 5 standard. However, the mana hand Ferbero manifested just now was undoubtedly at the basic Tier 5 standard. If the attack's power reached the intermediate Tier 5 standard, the resulting spatial storm would have had a radius of several thousand yards instead of just several hundred yards. Feng couldn't help reveling in Ferbero's power. After all, the feeling of wielding such power was simply wonderful. This was especially true for Ferbero's perception of an affinity for mana. When controlling the demon prince, Feng could feel his comprehension of the operating principles of mana becoming a lot clearer than before. This wasn't a sensation he could experience with just an ordinary Tier 4 physique. If I can maintain this state, I can probably break through my mana body's 100% threshold in just 1 or 2 hours. My control of mana might even improve, and getting promoted to a Grandmaster Magician would be far less of a struggle. The gap in physique and life rating wasn't something that basic attributes could compensate for. If the effects of basic attributes on one's combat power were calculated by addition and subtraction, then the effects of physique and life rating would be calculated by multiplication and division. This was also why the dragon race stood at the apex of all races. Even with the same basic attributes, a dragon would be many times stronger than a human. For the same reason, dragons, fallen angels, and such creatures were invincible among those of the same tier, with some even capable of transcending tiers. Based on the power Ferbero displayed, the demon prince's life rating was probably close to rivaling dragons. However, as Feng was savoring this wonderful moment, a stinging pain came from the depths of his mind. He paled in agony and almost staggered and fell to the ground. Sure enough, the system won't allow players to be immersed in this feeling for long. Feng smiled bitterly when he sensed the state of his concentration and the taint on his soul. He had manipulated Ferbero's mana for less than 3 seconds, yet not only did he expend 10% of his concentration, but the dark energy in his soul had also grown significantly stronger. The corrosive effect of manipulating Ferbero's mana was 1/3 of summoning the demon prince himself. Meanwhile, Tedelia, who had initially cowered after seeing its Tier 4 curse shattered, narrowed its 6 eyes when it noticed the intensity of Feng's aura plummeting. It could tell that Feng was no longer in his best condition. Immediately, Tedelia's 3 heads began chanting another Tier 4 curse, intending to kill Feng while he was weakened. Do you think I'll give you another chance? Upon noticing Tedelia's actions, Feng connected the dark energy in his soul with Ferbero's source of darkness once more. Ferbero's aura recovered to its peak. The demon prince's aura was so terrifying that even Illusory words and the others, standing several hundred yards away, trembled reflexively. Stay down. Feng had Ferbero brandish the fire spear without hesitation, gathering both mana and power of darkness for an attack. In addition, Feng even executed Light Shadow for this attack. However, as he was executing the mana technique indirectly, through Ferbero, he failed to execute the complete Light Shadow. Even so, the resulting attack was still magnitude stronger than the earlier mana hand. The next moment, illusory spears rained down from the sky and bombarded Tedelia's heads. The attacks were so quick and powerful that the Soul Singer couldn't dodge them in time, its body getting pummeled into the ground. Cracks extending several thousand yards formed on the ground due to the impacts. The violent trembling of the earth toppled everyone on Feng's team and forced them to sit on the ground. By the time the land stopped shaking, a crater with a 300-yard radius had formed in Tadelia's position. As for the Realm Lord itself, its body had sunk several dozen meters into the ground, only its 3 heads remaining above ground. Minus 1,165,446,428. A damage value exceeding 1 billion emerged slowly above Tadelia's head as its HP bar fell by a significant chunk. Even its life aura had weakened slightly. Crap. The commander is insane. He actually managed to summon such a demon. Solitary 9 was secretly astonished when he saw the damage and destruction Ferbero caused. At this rate, the fight could end in just another dozen hits or so. The boss monster that previously filled their minds with only thoughts of escape had been beaten down like a dog. The heavy injuries Tadelia suffered had also caused it to lose 30% of its basic attributes. There was simply no comparison between Tadelia and Ferbero. Alright, stop daydreaming. All of you activate your berserk skills and fight the boss together with the Demon Prince. We must get rid of the boss now. Otherwise, none of us will get out alive. Feng ordered weakly through the team chat as he sat down on the ground. He had used his full power to launch that previous blow. He had even executed a partial light shadow. As a result, he had expended 30% of his concentration and further enhanced the dark energy in his soul. Now he was in an incomparably weakened state, and just controlling Ferbero required all his focus. If they allowed Tadelia to recover and use another Tier 4 curse, they would team wipe. Hence, they needed to finish Tadelia while the Realm Lord was still weakened. They definitely could not afford to give it a chance to catch a breather. Upon hearing Feng's weak voice, Unyielding Heart immediately understood their situation. Hurriedly, he shouted through the team chat, "Everyone from Unyielding Soul, follow me. Everyone from Crimson Emperor, attack together. Activate your berserk skills." Illusory Words also commanded her subordinates to take action. She too understood that now was not the time to hold back. Immediately, 20+ peak experts from Azura, Unyielding Soul, and Crimson Emperor activated their berserk skills and rushed toward Tadelia simultaneously. However, the Soul Singer also realized the precarious situation it was in right now. After dragging its heavily injured body out of the crater, it fled without hesitation. Don't even think of getting away. Feng did not give Tadelia any opportunities to escape. Controlling Ferbero, he had the Demon Prince launch another attack at the Realm Lord. However, as Feng could execute only simple attacks with Ferbero right now, Tadelia managed to defend against the Demon Prince's attack despite being heavily injured. Minus 94,376,414. A damage value nearing 100 million appeared above Tadelia's head when its claw collided with Ferbero's fire spear. Disregarding the damage, Tadelia immediately jumped into the air to flee. However, Feng was no ordinary expert but someone at the peak of the Ascension realm. Even though he was in a mentally weakened state and couldn't get Ferbero to exert his actual combat power, he could still use the Demon Prince to pin down Tadelia. Every one of the attacks he executed with Ferbero targeted Tadelia's vitals, forcing the Realm Lord to defend itself. Meanwhile, Unyielding Heart and the others arrived within attack range and immediately joined the battle. All of them possessed power rivaling Tier 4 mythic monsters. Although they still couldn't afford to face Tadelia in a frontal confrontation, the damage they inflicted was significant. The next moment, normal attacks dealing over 2 million damage each, coupled with the occasional Tier 3 skill reaping over 10 million damage, landed on the Realm Lord one after another. As Tadelia was already struggling to deal with Ferbero, it was utterly powerless against the 20+ players' assault. It could only let the players bombard it with attacks as they pleased. 83%, 72%, 54%. Time passed quickly with one side sticking close to the other. One side was fleeing desperately, while the other side was pursuing and attacking ruthlessly. Fortunately, Feng and the others dealt sufficiently high damage, dragging Tadelia's HP down continuously. After 3 minutes into the battle, Tadelia's HP hit 30%. However, at this time, the peak experts on Feng's team lost the berserk skills effects one after another. Immediately, the team's overall DPS plummeted to just barely over Tadelia's battle recovery. At this rate, they wouldn't be able to finish the Realm Lord quickly. 10 minutes? 15 minutes? 20 minutes? When Tadelia's HP fell to 8%, its aura suddenly changed. The Realm Lord had finally recovered from its weakened state and was now back in peak condition. Die. Humans. Tadelia bellowed in human tongue, a hint of madness and contempt appearing in its eyes. It then began casting a Tier 4 curse. Damn it. We still didn't make it? Unyielding Heart's complexion sank when he saw another meteorite taking shape in the sky. They had fought for more than 20 minutes, yet they still failed to slay the weakened Tadelia. Now that the Realm Lord was casting another Tier 4 curse, the raid was as good as over. The one who's going to die is you. Some distance away from the battlefield, Feng stood up abruptly, a glimmer of light blooming in his eyes. He then manipulated the dark energy in his soul once more. Compared to the two previous instances, Feng was much more familiar with manipulating Ferbero's power this time. The next moment, Ferbero wielded his spear like a great sword and entered the stance for executing Light Shadow. The mana around the Demon Prince began rampaging. Simultaneously, an illusory sword 100 meters long appeared in midair. Die. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU at this moment, Feng had exhausted every bit of concentration he had left to have Ferbero execute Light Shadow. Boom. The illusory sword descended instantly. For a moment, everyone even had the misconception that the sky had been split apart. 1 second later, Tadelia's 50-meter-tall body divided into two halves and collapsed to the ground. The Realm Lord's HP zeroed out, the boss becoming deader than dead. Chapter 2761, Level Skyrockets. It's dead. That was close. For a moment there, I thought we would all get flattened. I am never going to go near superior mythics ever again before reaching Tier 4. These aren't things Tier 3 players like ourselves can do anything against. After everyone saw Tadelia bisected, they slumped down to the ground and breathed out a sigh of relief, rendered speechless by this narrow escape from death. However, many people also felt fortunate about their survival and couldn't help laughing happily. As for Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart, both were too tired to pay attention to Tadelia. They only wanted to sit down, rest, and relax their minds. However, before anyone could catch their breath, divine sounds descended from the sky and echoed throughout the valley, so melodious that everyone felt intoxicated. As expected of a first kill in the Ruined Mountain range. Even without divine providence, the loot's quality can actually trigger a divine hymn. Feng, who was lying on the ground, was a little surprised by this situation. He never thought that the first kill of a Realm Lord would yield such excellent loot. Initially, he had been thinking of using divine providence and personally dealing the finishing blow to Tadelia. However, the situation at the end did not permit him to do so. As a result, he could only rely on Ferbero to finish the Realm Lord. While the divine hymn resounded in the valley, bright rays of light enveloped all the survivors. Feng, who was initially at 78% of level 125, leveled up twice and reached 4% of level 127. Everyone else leveled up at least 3 times, with some even leveling up 4 times. The abundance of the EXP awarded utterly dumbfounded everyone. A superior mythic boss actually awards so much EXP? If it were before, we wouldn't get this much EXP even after killing 30 superior mythics. With this, we save at least half a month of grinding. It's a pity that everyone else died. If not, they would have saved on plenty of grinding time as well. Everyone couldn't help sighing over the abundant EXP from Tadelia. On one hand, they felt grateful that they could save plenty of time. On the other hand, they felt guilty for those who died. Not only did the dead players not receive any EXP from the raid, but they would even lose 1 level after resurrection. And even if Illusory Words and the other healers of the team resurrected them, they would still lose nearly half a level's worth of EXP. Only Feng remained unfazed by this situation. Setting aside that this raid happened after the first major update, just the fact that Tadelia was both a superior mythic monster and a Realm Lord already meant that the EXP granted upon its death would be incredibly lavish. The descent of a divine hymn would also increase the EXP awarded. Furthermore, Tadelia was a level 128 monster, whereas most of the players on the team hadn't even reached level 120 yet. The bonus EXP these players received would be significant. However, it would be almost impossible for them to level up so quickly again in the future. After all, each region of the Ruined Mountain range had only one Realm Lord, which took 5 natural days or more to respawn. Moreover, the Realm Lords for each region weren't fixed. Hence, although their team had secured information on Tadelia the Soul Singer, this information would be useless because the next Realm Lord that spawned in this region would probably be some other superior mythic monster. It was almost impossible for players to come across the same realm lord multiple times in forbidden lands such as the Ruined Mountain Range. Every boss that spawned would be new. Hence, players couldn't prepare for specific bosses and could only rely on brute strength or tools to secure victory. No. Standing up slowly, Feng looked at his teammates and commanded, "Start resurrecting the others. Thorn, you guys patrol the surroundings. Make sure no monsters come ambushing us." Although Ferbero's presence had scared the surrounding monsters into fleeing and the likelihood of an ambush was low, it never hurt to be careful. After all, whether it was a forbidden land for all life or a forbidden land for humans, a single mistake was all it took to team wipe. "Leave it to us." Lifeless Thorn nodded before leaving to patrol the surroundings together with Cleansing Whistle and the others. As for Yenya, Illusory Words, and the other surviving healers, they began resurrecting the team members killed by the Soul Devourers. Although these people had died because they had their concentration sucked dry, their souls did not get damaged. Hence, resurrection was still possible. Only they would be in a weakened state for several hours after getting resurrected and wouldn't be able to participate in battle right away. While the others were busy with their respective tasks, Feng slowly made his way to Tadelia's corpse and waited for the loot to appear. Regarding Tadelia's loot, none of the members of Unyielding Soul or Crimson Emperor gave it much thought. After all, Feng was the organizer of this team. Before they went on this expedition, they had already agreed that all discoveries made and items obtained would belong to Feng. This was the basis for the cooperation of their three guilds. Moreover, even without the agreement, both Unyielding Souls and Crimson Emperor's peak experts would be too ashamed to ask for any loot. From start to end, they had merely played a supporting role and barely did anything during the raid. In fact, if not for Feng landing the finishing blow, they wouldn't be alive right now. They also wouldn't have leveled up 3 or 4 times and gained a 15-day leveling advantage over the outside world's peak experts. One could say that the EXP harvest alone already made their trip to the Ruined Mountain Range worthwhile. Not to mention they also got to learn about the Ruined Mountain Range and find out just how dangerous the neutral map was. With this information, their two guilds would have a much easier time exploring the neutral map in the future. Let's hope the loot isn't too bad. I'd even settle for just 1 or 2 Tier 4 skill books or a legacy guidance fragment. Feng prayed inwardly when he saw the dark clouds in the sky gradually scattering. Compared to the outside world, the Ruined Mountain Range was impoverished. Unlike what most people of the outside world imagined, the Ruined Mountain Range wasn't a place where one could just kill a few random mobs and get rich quick. On the contrary, be it forbidden lands for humans or forbidden lands for all life, both were scarce in material resources. Instead, the reason players and NPCs deemed forbidden lands to be rich in resources was the legacy resources found there. In the current God's domain, the kingdoms and empires controlled Tier 3 legacy resources. In the case of Tier 4 legacies, though even the kingdoms and empires barely had any, some had none at all. However, the various forbidden lands still contained a considerable number of legacies for Tier 4 and above. Hence, forbidden lands were far richer in legacies than the maps in the outside world. Meanwhile, after players reached Tier 4, there were 3 ways they could improve themselves. The first and simplest method was upgrading their weapons and equipment. Such items were readily available in the various kingdoms and empires. The second method was significantly more difficult, obtaining Tier 4 skill and spell books. After reaching Tier 4, aside from spending legacy skill points to obtain Tier 4 legacy skills, the only other way players could obtain Tier 4 skills was through skill books. However, the monsters in the various kingdoms, empires, and standard neutral maps almost never dropped Tier 4 skill books. Only the monsters in Forbidden Lands would drop these items. Moreover, only monsters at the mythic rank or above dropped them, and the drop rate was incredibly low. Tier 4 skills and spells were crucial in deciding a Tier 4 player's strength. Oftentimes, the result of a duel between Tier 4 players could be predicted based on the number of Tier 4 skills and spells the two sides held. This was because Tier 4 skills were magnitude stronger than Tier 3 skills, with some capable of instant killing players of the same tier. Therefore, after reaching Tier 4, acquiring Tier 4 skill books was key to increasing a player's strength. The improvement players could gain from a Tier 4 skill could rival fragmented legendary items. Moreover, unlike fragmented legendary items, learned skills and spells didn't have a chance of dropping upon death. The third method to improve one's strength was also the most difficult one, obtaining legacy guidances for Tier 4 or above. After players reached Tier 4, levels would no longer be as important as before. Even if players reached level 150 and fulfilled the minimum condition for promotion to Tier 5, they wouldn't necessarily reach Tier 5. Getting promoted to Tier 5 was far more difficult than reaching Tier 4. For the Tier 4 promotion, players only needed to find their Tier 4 legacy land and learn a Tier 4 legacy skill within the allotted time. However, there were no such challenges for the Tier 5 promotion. Players weren't required to complete a troublesome promotion quest, nor did they need to search for some random location. Instead, getting promoted to Tier 5 was a very straightforward process. Players just had to raise their concentration to the Tier 5 standard, then reconstruct their own mana bodies, which would allow their essence to achieve a qualitative improvement. This was how one became a saint. Upon reaching Tier 5, players would no longer be an ordinary human. Their life rating would reach an extraordinary level. This was why very few players and NPCs would ever manage to reach Tier 5 in God's domain. Those who did would be dragons and phoenixes among men. The first step to reaching Tier 5 was breaking through the limits of one's mana body at Tier 3. While this might seem like an insignificant step, it would provide players with great help when they tried to reconstruct their mana bodies at Tier 4. The most difficult step was going from 0 to 1. Meanwhile, Violet Cloud had already taken the first step on the path to Tier 5. Meanwhile, legacy guidances could aid players in understanding the operating principles of mana because they recorded the comprehensions of ancient powerhouses on mana and the methods to utilize mana. Some even contained methods and experiences for constructing mana bodies. This was also why Feng had chosen to receive the Crimson-Eyed Sword Saint's legacy guidance without hesitation. At Tier 3, despite receiving samples of mana bodies, players still faced incredible difficulty constructing their mana bodies. If players wished to get promoted to Tier 5, they would need to construct a mana body that was at least 10 times stronger. The difficulty of this feat was simply unimaginable. Hence, legacy guidances were incredibly important. Only by continuously learning about mana and mana bodies could players construct a mana body rivaling Tier 5 existences. Otherwise, they would remain at Tier 4 for the rest of their lives. However, obtaining legacy guidances was easier said than done. Legacy guidance fragments were no less rare than fragmented legendary items. Generally, only the bosses of Forbidden Lands at the Realm Lord status or higher would have a small chance of dropping this treasure. This was also one of the reasons very few independent players ever managed to reach Tier 5. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. After all, let alone soloing superior mythics of the same level, even soloing superior mythics of a lower level was impossible for Tier 4 experts. Normally, raiding such monsters required the cooperation of multiple Tier 4 players. Moreover, even if players killed a superior mythic, they wouldn't necessarily obtain a legacy guidance fragment. And even if a fragment did drop, how many people would get a share of it? In addition, the guilds would frantically contest for these bosses, which further increased the difficulty of reaching Tier 5 for independent players. Unless one possessed a sufficiently strong backer or heaven-defying talent, Tier 5 would forever be beyond one's reach. Meanwhile, as Feng was praying and looking to the sky with an exhausted expression, dozens of dazzling items descended around him. The appearance of these items immediately attracted the ambient mana from several hundred yards around. When Feng spotted a strange stone sculpture of a monster among these items, his eyes instantly lit up. He even rubbed his eyes, thinking that he had seen wrong. An ancient beast sculpture? Did this monster swallow an ancient god's treasury? Chapter 2762, Ancient Treasure. While the strange beast statue held Feng's attention, the other players patrolling and resting in the distance noticed the several dozen items falling from the sky. Their eyes immediately widened in shock. Crap. What's up with this loot? I've never seen so many epic items and legendary materials dropping at once. The boss is a level 128 superior mythic, so the epic items it dropped can definitely be used up to level 150. Despite making so many contributions to the guild, I only managed to get a pair of epic bracers that can be used up to level 130. With all those epic items, I could probably fully gear myself in epic items. Despite everyone being peak experts or better, they still grew envious when they saw Tadelia's loot. Rather, it was inevitable that they would be envious. Although epic weapons and equipment had become a lot more common in the current God's domain, the majority of them could be used only up to level 100. Those that could be used up to level 120 were few and far between. As for epic items that could be used up to level 150, even the various superpowers wouldn't have more than 30 pieces. This wasn't because the various superpowers were slacking on killing level 100 plus mythic monsters, but because mythic monsters only had a tiny chance of dropping epic weapons and equipment that could be used up to level 150. Now, however, Tadelia had dropped over 10 epic items. Needless to say, every one of these epic items would be good up to level 150. After all, Tadelia was a level 128 superior mythic. According to their past experiences, the epic items dropped by level 120 plus superior mythic bosses would almost certainly have their level limit set at 150. However, the epic weapons and equipment dropped were only the tip of the iceberg. What truly made everyone's eyes glow were the legendary materials and the loot. Legendary materials could be used to create customized epic weapons and equipment, which would definitely be top tier among epic items. However, like level 150 epic items, the drop rate for legendary materials was pitifully low. Even level 100 plus superior mythics would, at most, drop inferior legendary materials. More often than not, they would drop only epic materials. Nonetheless, Tadelia had dropped as many as 7 legendary materials. In other words, one could produce 7 customized epic weapons and equipment with a level limit of level 150. Not to mention, the 20 plus inferior legendary materials Tadelia dropped could also be used to produce top-tier epic weapons and equipment. In other words, Tadelia alone had essentially dropped over 30 level 150 epic weapons and equipment, more than enough to fully arm 2 players in level 150 epic items. This was something impossible even for the various superpowers at this stage of the game. As expected of a forbidden land. Just the loot of a superior mythic boss here equals the loot of 3 or 4 superior mythic bosses in the outside world. The loot's quality is also significantly better. Unyielding Heart also couldn't help his astonishment at this scene. At the same time, he resolved that once he reached tier 4, he would absolutely bring a team here to explore the ruined mountain range. However, unlike everyone else, Feng paid no attention to the weapons, equipment and materials Tadelia dropped. Instead, he stepped forward, collected a 1-meter-tall beast statue, and stored it in his epic spatial bag without hesitation. In Feng's opinion, even the combined value of all the other items Tadelia dropped couldn't compare to the value of this beast statue. Sacred Beast Statue, Soul-Devouring Beast. Epic rank, unique item, one of 12 stone sculptures of sacred beasts made by Barstan. It holds incredible power. One shouldn't underestimate the beast statue just because it was an epic item. For tier 4 players and above, this beast statue was easily 1,000 times more valuable than legendary items. An ancient god in God's domain, Barstan was known as the god of elements by everyone. Legend had it that he could control all magic elements, and he was incredibly strong even among the ancient gods. In God's domain, any item belonging to a god would already be an amazing item, let alone an ancient god's possession. The 12 sacred beast statues were one of Barstan's earliest creations. To both gods and ancient gods, these statues were trash. However, to tier 4 players, these statues were priceless treasures. On the surface, the 12 sacred beast statues were only intended as room decor. However, if one placed these statues in areas with incredibly dense mana, the statues would generate a special signal. This signal allowed players inside the room to perceive the operating principles of a particular magic element. Although the granted perception was vague, it was still much better than blindly trying to feel and deduce the operating principles of the magic elements. Moreover, the effect stacked. With more beast statues collected, not only would one get to perceive more magic elements, but the intensity of the granted perception would also increase. In the past, a super guild had discovered an ancient god's treasury. And after working together with several superpowers and incurring countless casualties, the super guild had successfully raided the treasury. They had discovered 3 of the 12 sacred beast statues inside the treasury, one of them a medium-sized statue at the fragmented legendary rank. Due to these 3 beast statues, the super guild that found the treasury had ended up one of the 12 great guilds within a short period. Now, Feng had merely killed a superior mythic-ranked realm lord, yet he had actually acquired a sacred beast statue. This was simply unbelievable. I really lucked out this time. Although not even one fragmented legendary item dropped, the boss actually dropped an intact legacy guidance crystal, besides one of the 12 sacred beast statues. If any of those superpowers in the past found out about this, they would most likely go crazy from envy. Feng inwardly grew ecstatic as he picked up a crimson memory crystal from the ground. Normally, the legacy guidances players could obtain in Forbidden Lands were only fragmented crystals. Due to the instability of the mana inside these fragments, they would disappear after one use. However, an intact legacy guidance crystal was a different story. As the mana inside an intact crystal was incredibly stable, players could use it several times. Moreover, each use cost only 100 magic crystals. However, as these legacy guidance crystals were quite ancient, even a complete one could be used only 9 times. Regardless, an intact legacy guidance crystal was as valuable as a legendary item because it recorded far more information than a fragmented crystal. A single use of an intact crystal was easily worth 10 uses of fragmented crystals. In the past, some superpowers were even willing to exchange a legendary item for an intact legacy guidance crystal. However, nobody had ever taken up the offer. This was especially true for guilds and adventurer teams. After all, the legacy guidance crystal could lead to the birth of a tier 5 player, which was way more valuable than a legendary item. In God's domain, unless tier 6 god-ranked experts made an appearance, tier 5 players would stand at the pinnacle of the game. The resources a tier 5 player could acquire with their strength far exceeded the value of a legendary item. Several minutes later, Feng finished storing all of the dropped items in his spatial bag. He then let everyone rest for an additional 10 minutes before leading them toward the Earthfall secret land. Feng had no choice but to position the still weakened members at the center of the team. He also had Ferbero open up the path for them, clearing out the level 125 plus Great Lords and Grand Lords that assaulted their team on the way. He had no intention of resting whatsoever. "Commander, aren't we in too much of a hurry?" Solitary 9 asked in a whisper as he looked at Feng, who still had a deathly pale complexion. The fight with Tadelia left everyone's concentration below the 10% threshold. They could fall unconscious at any time. Feng was no exception. Yet, after resting for just a short while, Feng had led them deeper into the ruined mountain range without hesitation. At this point, they had already been running for close to 2 hours, and everyone had constantly been fighting throughout this period. Moreover, the monsters they fought all had considerably high combat standards and high basic attributes. Although Ferbero took on most of the monsters for them, the occasional monster still slipped by. And if they weren't careful, they would be easily overwhelmed by these monsters. "I know, but we don't have much time left," Feng said while controlling Ferbero. Smiling bitterly, he continued, "At this point, I can no longer summon a second demon prince. If the duration of this one lapses before we reach our destination, we'll die a miserable death." Upon hearing Feng's words, Solitary 9 looked at the endless monsters around them and got goosebumps. At the same time, he subconsciously raised his shield and stood closer to Feng. If not for the demon prince, they would definitely be doomed. In fact, they wouldn't be able to cope with all these monsters, even with several tier 4 experts on the team. After all, fighting in the ruined mountain range cost a lot of stamina and concentration. It was impossible for players to fight endlessly. "Move faster. We're almost there." Feng urged everyone through the team chat after taking a look at his map. At Feng's words, everyone hurriedly closed the distance to Ferbero. The team then broke out in a mad dash while blocking the attacks coming from the surrounding monsters. After frantically advancing for another dozen minutes or so, the team finally discovered a huge cave in the valley, with an entrance several dozen meters high. The cave exerted a mental influence that rivaled Tadelia's, making everyone feel discomfortable. "Guild leader Black Flame, is this the place you were talking about?" Illusory Words asked anxiously. When she looked at the nearby cave, she got a sense of depression and uncertainty. A hint of fear had even appeared in her heart. If she was already experiencing such feelings even before entering the cave, it wasn't hard to imagine how dangerous it would be inside. Looking at the God Slayer's map, Feng said with certainty, "It should be here." But that mental influence. Unyielding Heart had goosebumps as he looked at the cave. If another monster like Tadelia emerged from the cave, they really would be on their way to the underworld. The mental influence is indeed considerable, but we went to great lengths to get here. We can't possibly give up now, can we? Feng also understood Unyielding Heart's worries. If they died now, it would indeed be a big loss. However, he had to obtain the God Slayer's treasure no matter what. In the worst-case scenario, he was even willing to use his final trump card. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. "Okay, let's go in and take a look." Unyielding Heart nodded. He too thought that Feng's words were correct. They had already gotten this far. It would be a pity if they abandoned the expedition. Not to mention they still had the Demon Prince to guard them. If further progress was truly impossible, they could still escape. Following which, Feng and the others made their way to the cave. However, when the team walked through the cave entrance, a startling scene suddenly occurred. The instant Ferbero stepped into the cave, a red beam shot out from the cave's depths. Before Feng could even have Ferbero execute evasive maneuvers, the red beam had already pierced through the demon prince's body. After getting struck, the Lord of the Dead, who had been invincible up to this point, burst into a bundle of flames and vanished without a trace. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.